Nana.
Okay, so we are getting ready to go here. Apologies for the delays. There's extra technical issues that we had to arrange for this meeting. So we have quite a few people at this planning committee meeting, so we're cooking with steam now. Welcome to the 11th special meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. I will start by saying that City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements, and meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. And with that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. None in council chambers. We have councillors Turner and Hopkins in chambers. Deputy Mayor Helmer and Mayor Holder coming to us by Zoom. I'm not seeing any disclosures there either. So we will first go to, oh, I have to declare an interest. Sorry. I will declare a pecuniary interest on the consent item 2.1 regarding 3.307 Fanshawe Park Road East and 3.5, which is also concerning 307 Fanshawe Park Road East. So with that, I will turn the chair over to my vice chair, Councillor Turner. He's going to chair the meeting for the consent items.
And Madam Chair, just wanted to let you know that I'm here as well.
Thank you, Councillor Kayabaga. My apologies for missing you.
Thank you. So with respect, we move on to item number 2 on the consent agenda. 2.1 is a request for council resolution under section 425 1.4 of the Planning Act with respect to 307 Fanshawe Park Road East. There is also a request for delegation status to this. So there's a staff report, and Mr. Hannum from Zelenka Priamo would like delegation status. Perhaps we might wish to dispense with the request first, and then we can move towards the to hearing from staff with respect to the request for a resolution. I would look to the committee to see if there's a desire to hear the delegation and grant the status. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, happy to receive the delegation.
So moved. Look for a seconder. See one in Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. I'll start with Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5 with 1 recused.
Thank you. So perhaps I can go to staff first with this, and then we can go to Mr. Hannum.
Go
ahead, Mr. Tomzinzik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for a minor variance to allow the committee to accept an application for a minor variance application on 307 Fanshawe Road. The background of this is that the original application requested stacked townhouses, and the proposed development consisted of a stacked townhouse at the front of the site with one unit above the other, and the rear of the site had stacked townhouses, 3 on top of each other. The definition for stacked townhouses, though, limits the number of stacked units to 2. And so the 3-unit stacked townhouse is not consistent with the definition for stacked townhouse. This was an oversight during the zoning bylaw amendment application, but there is no change to the development proposal and no increase in the number of units that council had already deliberated upon. So the request is to amend or vary the definition for stacked townhouse to allow 3 units, 1 on top of each other.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson-Zink. Any questions for staff from the committee? Seeing none of, Councillor Helmer, or Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm not sure if do you want to hear from the applicant first, or you want me to ask a question now?
What I think might be best is if we did hear from the applicant, so we could hear it all together, but if you wanted to provide the committee the opportunity to ask questions if they wanted to go first.
I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hannam, I believe you're in there we are, committee room 1. Please step forward and you have 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon, members of committee. My name is Dave Hannam. I'm an associate with Zelinka Priamo. We're the planning consultants for Royal Premier Homes. As Mike alluded to, we're in an unfortunate circumstance here that we need to respectfully request Municipal Council allow us to submit the minor variance application for the approved townhouses so close after the zoning bylaw had been approved back in October 2019. Unfortunately, neither city staff or ourselves were aware of this technical issue with regards to the definition of townhouses. Otherwise, it would have been captured in the site-specific zoning. It was brought to our attention through the current SPA process, which is later on the agenda, which we can talk about. As Mike alluded to, this is really just a technical variance. I know that we won't get into the merits of discussing it at this point in time. What I can confirm as well is that there is no increase in terms or change to unit counts, densities, heights of buildings, parking, setbacks, all of that sort of stuff. What I also can confirm is that as part of the zoning application, we actually submitted floor plans for this building. Those floor plans haven't changed at all as part of the SPA process for Building B. Also, as part of the public notification process for the zoning, it was clearly indicated on all the notices that 18 units would be within this building. And as I indicated, that unit count has not changed. With regards to the current SPA process, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that have been referenced specifically to zoning to ensure that they won't form part of this future minor variance application. There was reference in the SPA circulation comments to a bump out on Building 1. That is going to be removed as part of the next submission for SPA, so there won't be any zoning issue with regards to that. There was also some comments about an accessory storage shed that's located in the southeast corner of the property. We have provided confirmation through to staff in terms of the architectural details of that building in terms of heights and setbacks, and that in our opinion fully complies with the zoning. So in terms of the future minor variance application, it's only to address this definition, technical definition issue. And as you know, as part of the future minor variance application, that's going to be subject to all the necessary and required public notification and consultation processes under the Planning Act. So there's, in terms of transparency, there's plenty of opportunity for residents and staff to fully consider the proposal to ensure that what we're saying in terms of no changes to the project is the case. So as such, we would respectfully request that the Municipal Council allow us to move forward and submit the minor variance application. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Haddam. So I'll look to the committee for any questions of either staff or the applicant. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair to perhaps planning staff or maybe the clerks, is it possible to allow the variance application, but only for the issue of the a definition and nothing else?
Mr. Thomas-Inzig?
It's a good question, and it's something that off the cuff, I would say yes, but I would like just to have a moment to perhaps a little bit of time just to look at the Planning Act just to make sure that that answer is correct. But my initial reaction is yes.
Okay. In the meantime, oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just wonder if any of the clerks have anything to add. I know the language we usually pass when we allow these minor variance applications to go ahead is quite general. It just says we give leave for the application to go ahead. And I wonder, I want to be precise in the language, but I do think since the applicant has been so clear that it's really just about the zoning bylaw definition on stacked townhouses and not the height or the intensity or any of those other things, that we can be very clear that if we can, that we're only allowing the application to change the zoning bylaw definition and nothing else. So I just wonder, perhaps if we heard the language for what the normal motion would look like, that might help us figure out what we might want to change to narrow it down.
It looks like we might have an answer from either Mr. Schultes or Ms. Lisinski.
Sorry, I'll read the entire recommendation. That the following actions be taken with respect to the property located at 307 Fanshawe Park Road East, Part A. On the recommendation of the city clerk, the report dated July 15th, 2020, and entitled Request for Council Resolution under Section 45 brackets 1.4 bracket of the Planning Act 1990 CP 13-307 Fanshawe Park Road East be received for information, and Part B, the Managing Director, Development and Compliance Services and Chief Building Official be authorized to accept a minor variance application as the application does not meet the definition of stacked townhouse relating to the property located at 307 Fanshawe Park Road East.
So from that, it sounds like it's still a little broad, and it speaks specifically to the measure of that. But we perhaps might be able to wordsmith that in such a way that allows it to be exact. So for the purposes of amending the definition of the stacked townhouses or something to that effect, does that work to your intent, Deputy Mayor?
I think the words that probably need to be inserted, and certainly I look to the clerk about the language, but I think it's application to vary the zoning definition for stacked townhouses. I think that's what we need to add in. So after application to vary the definition for stacked townhouses. I think that would simplify it and make it clear to the community who had many, many concerns about all these other issues, that that's the only thing that is going ahead to the Committee of Adjustment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I get nods from the clerks that that's what they'll be typing up right now, and then once we get to that, I imagine you'll make a motion to that effect. Do you have anything further?
Just in general, I wanted to say I regret that we didn't catch this earlier in the process. I know these sort of second go-arounds through Committee of Adjustment can add some delays. It seems like an easy thing to clear up with a minor variance application, and I'm willing to let it go ahead to Committee of Adjustment to deal with this specific issue only.
Thank you. I have Councillor Hopkins and Mayor Holder.
Yes, thank you. And I'm very supportive of seconding this motion. I too have concerns, heard the concerns from the community on this application, and it's unfortunate that this is just a technical error, but I think we do have to be specific in dealing with the definition of a stacked townhouse as it goes to Committee of Adjustment. So pleased that the clerks are going to clerk the motion going forward, but important that we really understand what's going on. And I do want to mention as well that the Committee of when this does go to the Committee of Adjustments, that there is a public participation meeting, and the community will also have an opportunity to make comments at that time. So with that, happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Well, I guess there's no need to third it then, since we've got someone who will move and second this technical variation. You know, I would agree with the Deputy Mayor's comments, and it's unfortunate that this wasn't caught earlier. But having said it, it's being caught now. Not helpful to put everyone through the whole process a second time, but it's important to get it right. So I'll be in support of it.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none at this point, I'll go to the clerk to read the motion, and we'll look for the mover and seconder on that.
Part B, the Managing Director, Development and Compliance Services and Chief Building Official be authorized to accept a minor variance application in regards to the definition of stacked townhouse relating to the property located at 307 Fanshawe Park Road East.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk. Might I suggest that that be altered to read for the purpose of amending the definition of stacked townhouse, and that would I think meets the intent of the Deputy Mayor's amendment to that, to ensure that that the application is solely for that purpose. And I would look to the mover, Deputy Mayor Helmer. Is that consistent with your desires?
I think that's fine. I would like to hear from the Managing Director, Development and Compliance Services, or one of his staff about whether that's going to cover exactly what needs to happen. I just want to make sure we're not doing something inadvertent that's going to cause a problem.
Fair enough. Mr. Thompson-Sick.
Mr. Chair, we're comfortable with that additional wording, and we're comfortable that council has the ability to apply that additional language as well to limit the scope of the minor variance.
Wonderful, then I'll move it.
Very good. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Look to Councillor Hopkins to second. Any further discussion? Seeing none at this time, I will call the question, starting with Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Cadbaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
And I'll vote yea as well. And Councillor Cassidy has indicated her recusal.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5 with 1 recused.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. I will return the chair to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. First thing I will do is a minor modification to the agenda. We have an added item, 4.1, and I would like to put 4.1 up a little bit just after 3.4. So when, as we move through the scheduled items, it will go 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, then item 4.1. And then item 3.5. Hopefully that's clear to everybody. So let's move to the scheduled items right now. The first one is item 3.1. And for 3.1, we have a little bit of modification of how we're doing things. We're making accommodation on 3.1. So we're using closed captioning, and Mr. Schultes will be our comments will be transcribed so that everybody can see what the committee is saying, and Mr. Schultes will read back the reply from the planner. Joanne Lee is the planner here, And just to be pretty clear, even though your screen will light up when you speak, if you could just say your name, members of committee, before your comments, if you have any comments or questions on 3.1, so that we know, so that everybody knows who is speaking and can be addressed accordingly. So with that, I'll go to item 3.1 and see if Ms. Lee would like to give us a brief introduction, which will be read by Mr. Schultes.
Good afternoon. This is Justin Adama, the Manager of Planning Policy. When I spoke to Ms. Lee before this, she asked if I could give the general overview of the application.
That's wonderful. Go ahead, Mr. Adama.
So Ms. Lee will be available, as you mentioned, to respond to questions, as will I, after the, if there are any, and those responses will come through the Zoom chat. So this is a housekeeping amendment to the London Plan, meaning that it's meant to clean up some minor issues that have arisen since the approval of the plan. This amendment is required really for two purposes. The first being to recognize developments that have been approved by council since the London Plan was approved, but subject to appeals. So these developments were approved when large portions of the plan were under appeal, and at the time council did not have jurisdiction to amend the London Plan. Since then, more portions of the London Plan have come into force, and council now has the ability to add specific policies to the plan to permit these approved developments. This is important because under the Planning Act, all bylaws are required to conform with an official plan. So when the 1980 plan is repealed and a new zoning bylaw is prepared, these developments will become non-conforming despite how recently they were approved without this amendment. So that's the first purpose. The second purpose is just to correct some minor errors and omissions that have been picked up on since the approval of the plan back in 2016. And this is just a result of working with the plan over a number of years now. We've identified certain issues that will be fixed through this process. I won't describe any of the specific changes that are recommended in this amendment, but as I mentioned, Ms. Lee and myself are available to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. Are there any questions or comments on this report? I'm seeing none. Do I have a motion to introduce this bylaw? Sorry about that. I need a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote. There are too many moving parts at this meeting. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Are there any members of the public in either of the committee rooms who are here for this London Plan item? I'll ask one more time. We're on item 3.1. It's a public participation meeting for the London Plan Housekeeping Amendment. Are there any members of the public for this housekeeping amendment? I see. Okay, I see none. So I'm looking for a motion now to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, I have 3 screens in front of me and there's a lot going on here, so it's just taking me a while to find my groove here. I think things are moving along now. Now I wonder if the committee has any questions or comments on this report. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm happy to move the recommendation. I just wanted to say thank you very much to the planning staff who have been wrangling all of these housekeeping amendments. There's a lot of things to keep track of over the years as we keep approving OPA amendments. I think this is a necessary thing. I know that it requires painstaking attention to detail, and I appreciate the work that planning staff have done to make sure we catch all of these things. So good work to Ms. Lee and all the other folks who worked on it.
Well said, Deputy Mayor. We have a mover. Do I have a second? Moved by Councillor Turner, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
We have another public participation meeting. That's item 3.2. It is an amendment to section 4.11, household sales in zoning bylaw Z1. Can I have a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And I'll call the vote. Councillor Helmer, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I wonder if staff have a brief introduction for this item.
To you, Madam Chair. It's Greg Barrett here. Chuck Parker is the planner who's working on this file, has a brief overview for the committee.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment came through the urban agriculture strategy, and it was a way to make fresh food more available to the general public. And there's various ways that we have tried to do that, either through farm markets, through other sales opportunities, through local food procurement. And one of the things is to allow food growing on an individual property that's grown by the resident of the dwelling to be sold similar to like a garage sale. You could sell your fresh vegetables as part of a garage sale, or you could sell it on the property. And that's what this amendment is intended to do. Right now, there's a restriction on the number of sales that you can have per year at 2. And there's also a limit on the duration of those sales. We aren't changing the duration of the sales, but we are changing the number of opportunities that you're allowed to sell vegetables and fruits grown on your property. And that's what the purpose of this amendment is for.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Are there any members of the public in the committee rooms who would like to ask questions or provide comments on this item? And I'll check again. Any members in the committee room, members of the public looking to speak to this item? I'm not seeing anyone rushing to the microphone, so I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I will call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support this amendment to this recommendation to amend the selling of produce in the urban growth area. I think it's really important as we supporting our urban agricultural strategy, but also the importance of food security as we deal with these uncertain times. It's giving us an opportunity to support, grow more food. We're hearing a lot more in the community of the need and the importance of growing food, but also distributing it as well. So very supportive of this recommendation and the changes that are being made. It just makes sense too. Our season for growing is very short and limited, and taking advantage of that seasonal opportunity to sell and produce is also important. And again, staff did mention that we're not changing the duration of each time. It will still be the 2 days. But again, glad to see this amendment come forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? I'm seeing none. Do I have a motion? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, moving the staff recommendation. Do I have a second? Councillor Kayabaga, thank you. And I will call, oh, hold on. Councillor Turner has something to say.
Sorry, just a quick question, if I might, through you. This is limited to produce and not for prepared foods. Is that correct?
Mr. Parker, is this limited only to produce, or are prepared foods allowed to be sold?
As the amended definition, I would say that no, you're not allowed to sell processed foods, only fruits and vegetables, actually produce grown on the property.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was clear and that was sufficient. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments? No. Now I will call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving to item 3.3, which is a public participation meeting for an application at part of 65 Brisbane Street. Can I have a motion to open the public participation meeting? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. You're moving faster than my mouth. I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and I'll go to Ms. Hahn for that.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Through you, this is Daniel Hahn, file planner for application Z9195. The application pertains to part of 65 Brisbane Street, located at the southernmost end of Brisbane Street in the Hamilton Road Planning District. The park requested to be rezoned is a 74.8 square meter portion of city-owned lands, as identified as section 1.5 of the staff report. The property is currently undeveloped and forms part of a city-owned green space buffer between the residential neighborhood on Brisbane Street and the linear park system along the north bank of the Thames River's south branch. The applicant is requesting to rezone the lands from an open space OS1 zone to a residential R2-2 zone, matching the zoning regulating the lands to the immediate north of the property at 81 Brisbane Street. The purpose and effect of this zoning change is to facilitate the severance, sale, and conveyance of the 74.8 square meter part of 65 Brisbane Street. The lands would subsequently be used as a private driveway associated with the residential use at 81 Brisbane Street. Municipal Council previously declared the property surplus and authorized the sale of the lands at fair market value on December 10th, 2019. The sale of the lands were made conditional on, first, the completion of a stage 2 archaeological assessment, which was submitted as part of this application to the satisfaction of Development Services Heritage Planner and the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industries. Second, the sale was conditional on the rezoning of the lands to residential zone. And third, the erection of a 1.5 meter high black chain link fence on the new south limits of the lands. Development Services is recommending two actions. Staff are recommending that the subject lands be interpreted to be located in the neighborhood's place type for the purposes of conformity to the London Plan. And staff are also recommending approval of the requested zone change on the basis that the proposed amendment is consistent with the 2020 provincial policy statement, would conform to the enforced policies of the London Plan, conforms to the enforced policies of the 1989 official plan, represents good planning by removing land use conflicts between 81 and 83 Brisbane Street, and facilitates functional improvements to the residential use at 81 Brisbane Street. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Any technical questions for the planner? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to confirm that I understand where the fence is. So is the fence just on the south side and it's just along the boundary between the two neighbors? Just want to confirm that I'm reading that right.
Mr. Hahn?
Through the chair, the fence would be located at the southern limits of the new zone boundary and the new property boundary. So that would be in between the city-owned lands and the new zoning area. So it wouldn't be in between the property lines of 81 and 83 Brisbane Street, if that was the question.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public here for this item? Oh, come to the microphone.
Yes, we have one speaker here.
Thank you. Just come to the microphone and state your name, and then you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Ron Humphreys, and I live at 81 Brisbane Street. I thank the members of the Planning and Environment Committee for this opportunity to speak to the application. And although I'm standing here by myself, my lawyer, Marshall Main, who put the application together, is actually viewing on your YouTube channel, and he's available on Zoom call if I need to make a phone call to him if you have some real difficult questions for me. In January 2016, I retired and my wife and I moved to London. And I remember the first time we went through the house at 81 Brisbane. It had been all set up. We sat down in the house, my wife in the living room and I in the kitchen, and we said, we'd love to live here. We met our neighbor who lived at 83 Brisbane, living at the other side of the driveway, and had an interesting visit with her. And we noticed the homes in Brisbane seemed to be well cared for. Only later did we discover the added bonus of the nearby Thames River, the walking trails, and the Vauxhall and St. Julian parks. The house itself had been owned by several decades by the previous owner, and when it became necessary for him to move to a long-term care home, the house was sold. The new owners completely renovated and then sold the house to us 1 year later. Our new neighbor and I worked on several mutual projects, including replacing the fence at the bottom of the present driveway. She paid for the materials and I did the work. Sometime during our first summer in our new home, she pointed to a post in the driveway. Apparently, our neighbor's father, who used to live there, still owned the home. He has since passed away. He had put the post into the ground to indicate the property line. Even though the position of the post suggested they owned almost 2/3 of the front of the driveway, I was not too concerned, as we were both just parking as if it was a normal side-by-side driveway. After about 1.5 years, in September of 2018, she got a car for her niece, who also lives with her, and now she had 2 cars to park in her driveway. She told me that I was only allowed to park at the entrance end of my driveway, and I insisted I bought the whole driveway and would park where I chose. She insisted that I only park with her permission. She then got the boundary line staked by a surveyor, and we hired a survey of our land, and it showed that indeed there was a problem in the driveway. It seems that in the early 1950s, 2 brothers bought the last 2 lots at the end of Brisbane on the west side. They built their houses with little concern as to the actual boundary line. Now the survey shows the houses were not built perpendicular to the street, but on a slight angle. This leaves 81 Brisbane, now my home, having only about 6.5 foot wide driveway at the entrance and almost 9 feet wide at the fence. I then went to City Hall and spoke to Mark Conley of the City Realty Services, to ask about purchasing the vacant city land adjacent to the south of my home. On January of this year, we signed a conditional offer agreement with the City of London to purchase the land. This rezoning is one of those conditions. The other conditions, has already been mentioned, the archaeological assessment and the R plan have been completed. And the final condition is the erecting of the 1.5 meter high fence, which will be completed after the paving for the driveway has been done. And I believe the fence will be along the south side and then at the back end of the property as well. I've already gotten a quote from London Paving to create a double driveway on the land, and another quote from MLC London Fencing to install a fence along the new boundary. It is interesting to note that when the water and sewer lines in our street were marked last year, at least a couple of empty lots south of my house are marked as having service. At one time, there was a plan in place to use this land as residential. I want to conclude my remarks with a public thank you. Over the past year, I have visited, called, and emailed several departments in City Hall. Every staff person I spoke with was professional, considerate, and even caring about my situation. They went beyond what I had expected of them. Never did they simply say, that's not my department. Instead, they listened to my concern and then helped me to understand what department to speak to and what to expect from them. In one instance, the staff person even called several others on my behalf while I waited. I have felt that every person took their time to understand my situation and to help me towards a viable resolution. I also want to thank Daniel Hahn for the extensive report he has prepared for you this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to reconsider this rezoning request, and I would be happy to answer any questions or give any further details to the step that I and my lawyers have taken to get us to this point in finding a resolution to the need for an accessible driveway.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. Are there any questions for the applicant? I'm not seeing any. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this matter? Any other members of the public for the Brisbane Street matter? Not seeing any, so I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. And I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Great. Any comments or questions from committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I think my only question would have been if this was in active public use, but the discussion had already happened at other committee to allow the conveyance and the preparation for the conveyance of this. I think the application seems reasonable. I think it would be important for us to recognize the thanks from the applicant and his recognition of the outstanding work of our staff to be able to help facilitate the application. So I recognize that, and I extend my thanks as well. And to our managers and directors, if you could pass that along to anybody who may have had contact with the applicant through this process. It's the type of service that we love to hear about, and it's worth recognizing. So I'm in support of the application.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, and thanks on my behalf from the entire city, or sorry, the city, sure, but the committee as well. Mayor Holder.
Well, for the rest of the city, then, in the little bit that you've left me, if Councillor Turner has moved that, I'm pleased to second it, but I will respect whatever his wish is. I think the applicant was exceptionally thoughtful in his comments, and I also want to acknowledge his working with staff and the positive efforts. So fully in support, Chair.
Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Mayor Holder, and I too also would like to say thanks to Mr. Humphreys for coming and speaking to us today. So we have a motion on the floor, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's move to item 3.4, a public participation meeting for 1146 and all the way to 1156 Byron Baseline Road. Can I have a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I will go to Ms. Lowry for a brief introduction of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application for a zoning bylaw amendment for the lands municipally addressed as 1146 to 1156 Byron Baseline Road. The site has an area of approximately 0.54 hectares and is currently undeveloped aside from 2 residential garages, which are no longer in use. The site is also encumbered by an approximately 18-meter wide easement on the east side of the property. The site is surrounded by low-density residential uses, predominantly in the form of single detached dwellings, with other forms of residential development, including townhouses, further east on Byron Baseline towards Colonel Talbot Road. There is quite a bit of history on this site in that it was recently subject to a previous zoning bylaw amendment application in 2017, which at the time proposed to rezone the site to a residential R8-4 zone with special provisions to permit the development of a 4-story, 38-unit apartment building. The special provisions proposed an increase in maximum building height of 15 meters and a reduced front yard setback of 1.8 meters. The applicant had appealed this application to the local planning appeals tribunal based on non-decision, which was ultimately dismissed and the zoning refused. The applicant is now proposing to rezone the site from the current R17 zone to an R57 zone to facilitate the development of a 28-unit cluster townhouse development consisting of 20 3-story stacked back-to-back townhouse units and 8 2-story townhouse units. Special provisions would ensure the taller building is constructed at the front of the site along Byron Baseline, which is an arterial road, and the shorter building constructed at the rear of the site abutting the existing single detached dwellings fronting on September Lane. An additional special provision would also ensure the parking area is set back 7.5 meters from the ultimate road allowance. Through the review of this application, the applicant has made several changes to their plan, including reducing the number of units from 30 to the 28, as well as adding landscaped islands to the parking area, relocating and enlarging the on-site amenity space, adding full-size driveways in front of the garages that are attached to the proposed 2-story townhouse units, and removing parking spaces that were previously located beyond the front building facade. Several neighboring property owners raised concern about the proposal, and in particular, the existing cedar hedge on the site and its adequacy to provide screening and privacy. To address these concerns, staff are recommending the Site Plan Approval Authority consider provision of enhanced boundary landscaping on the west, south, and east property lines with plant species that have screening and privacy qualities. As well, to address concerns with respect to potential contamination of well water, staff are recommending an H183 holding provision be applied to ensure the recommendations of the hydrogeological assessment that was submitted as part of the complete application are captured in the development agreement at a future site plan stage. Staff is therefore satisfied that the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with the enforced policies of the 1989 official plan and the London Plan. As such, staff recommend the zoning bylaw amendment be approved, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Are there any technical questions for Ms. Lowry? No. Is the applicant here? And would the applicant like to address the committee?
Stand there. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Barani, and I'm joined today by Carla and Ahmed Barani. And we're here, obviously, for the proposal of the development at 1146 to 1156 Byron Baseline Road. First off, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to thank the City of London for being able to make such a safe and easy environment for us to be able to all meet and discuss. and in such a fast way as well. I'd also like to thank most notably Jersey and Catherine for helping us throughout, maybe for, it's been about a year now, especially with Jersey, with urban design, and Catherine for the last 5 or 6 months in really guiding us to where we've gotten now. And we wouldn't have been able to do any of this without you guys. I mean, Catherine basically hit the nail on everything, so I'll keep it nice and short. I'll just tell you about most of our objectives for this project. We just really want to improve the aesthetics of Byron Baseline Road and to create a better and more positive streetscape image. We also want to eliminate the vacant aspect of land, not only for us, but also for the city and also for the neighborhood. We have a strong desire to keep the natural cedar hedge along the perimeter of the property, and we've actually discussed over the last year with our engineers and surveyors of how we could do this. And mainly it would be through the use of a retaining wall to make sure that during the construction and after the development would be built, that the vegetation would stay intact. And you could see that in our planning report. Most importantly, we want to ensure the privacy of all the abutting properties as well, because we are keen on creating privacy. At the end of the day, these will be townhomes that will be sold, and we would want privacy for that development as well as all the neighbors. We've done our best to ensure in terms of design that it matches and it fits with the neighborhood. We understand that obviously new construction won't necessarily conform to mid-century style homes, but we've done our best to make sure that it seems like a best fit for the neighborhood. And lastly, we understand the sensitivity around infill residential construction or infill residential intensification, and we've tried to make this as timid of intensification as we could. And we've worked really, really hard alongside Catherine and Jersey to make sure that we followed whatever they recommended as per the London plan. And that's it from us. We'll try to keep it short. So I'll now pass the baton to whoever's next. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see we have a number of people in the gallery. Oh, there's somebody in committee room 4. Are you here to speak to this issue as well?
I am.
Okay, can you state your name and then you have 5 minutes.
My name is Greg Thurston. I live at 18 September Lane, which is immediately behind the site of the proposed buildings. As we've heard, in 2017, the same developer brought a proposal forward that the city did not feel was a good fit for our neighborhood. The developer then took the proposal to LPAT, where it was also seen as a bad fit. Now the developers brought forth a new proposal, which in my mind is very similar to the original one with one glaring exception. They essentially took a floor off the 4-story apartment building and put it on the ground. When the developer presented the original proposals to the peer panel review on December 20th of 2017, these comments were made. Need to look at reducing the height of or townhouse model, needs to better relate to the street, consider different build form to reflect patterning in the neighborhood, too big, too tall, footprint too large. Although they call the building at the front of the lot a 3-story cluster townhouse, it is in fact very similar in shape and size to the original 4-story apartment building. The new proposal does not address these recommendations. In fact, the one that drew my attention was the one that stated that the footprint was too large. A footprint takes up space on the ground by definition. This new proposal has a bigger footprint than the original proposal. Looking at the ruling from the LPAT hearing issued on January 23rd of 2019, the following are quotes. The city witnesses indicated that staff may be willing to consider and potentially recommend a more modest intensification proposal for the subject property, such as a townhouse development. The core issue is one of compatibility with the character of the neighborhood. The proposed development, 1, should employ innovative and creative urban design techniques to ensure maintenance of the neighborhood's character and compatibility. 2, overpowers its neighboring uses. 3, represents overdevelopment of the subject property as reflected by the substantially reduced front yard setback, parking layout, and driveway proposed to be located within a municipal servicing easement. 4, which is not located at an intersection and is located among single detached dwellings, would appear drastically out of character with its surrounding area. 5, in no way reflects the character of the surrounding primarily single detached residential neighborhoods. The report went on to say both the height and front yard setback are out of character for this neighborhood and are not compatible. The front yard setback represents a dramatic shift from the existing setbacks on Byron Baseline Road and is not a good fit for this neighborhood. The unique height and form of the corner heritage listed property next to the subject property creates an identifiable landmark in the community, and that the reduced front yard setback and location of the proposed building blocks views to this landmark building. The proposal makes no attempt to protect the privacy of adjacent properties, and in particular those to the rear of the subject property on September Lane. Although all of these comments relate to the original proposal from 2017, in my opinion, they still ring true. The original proposal, and was discussed today, has talked about and put a lot of stock in the cedar shed that separates the subject land with the homes immediately behind it. I commissioned a certified arborist to take a look at this hedge. First and foremost, it's not a hedge. It is a row of individual trees as reflected in this statement. The definition of a tree is defined as an erect woody plant reaching over 4 meters in height with a distinct crown and with a trunk measuring at least 7.5 centimeters in diameter, measured at 1.4 meters from the natural ground level. The white cedar trees meet all the requirements of a tree. The white cedar trees have never been maintained, have never had any maintenance, pruning, or shaping during the entire time of their life cycle. For cedar trees to be classified as a hedge, they would have to have been trimmed and pruned early in their life cycle and had continuous pruning to encourage growth and creating a thickness to them which would create privacy. By allowing these trees to grow wild, they are now classified as trees and not a hedge. They provide less than 30% privacy to the backyards and houses located on September Lane. The report goes on to state, any excavation, digging, or disruption to the soil within 3.6 meters of the tree will cause significant damage to the roots and will result in dieback, thinning, and potentially the death of the cedar trees, which will then have to be removed. His recommendation therefore states, I recommend that no digging, soil disturbances such as compaction from equipment driving on the roots be done within 3.6 meters of the cedar trees, as this will cause significant damage to the roots, which will result in significant decline or death to the cedar trees.
You have about 15 seconds, Mr. Thurston.
The 3.6 distance is taken from London's Tree Protect bylaw. I've spoken at length about a lot of things. What does it mean? I believe, and many of my neighbors believe, the same way that this proposal is not significantly different than the original proposal, and that the city should not be granting this zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Stop. Sorry about that. Are there any members of the public in a committee room or in the gallery who would like to speak to this? I see.
Speakers in committee room 1.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we have one speaker in committee room 5.
Okay, so I'll go to committee room 1 first. If they would just make their way to the microphone, state your name, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Patty Landry. I live at 1147 Byron Baseline Road, right across the street from the proposed amendment. My husband Doug and I live across the street. We had already provided our comments and our concerns in an email to the city, including our council representative, Anna Hopkins, back in early March. I'm here speaking today to encourage each and every committee member to seriously consider the impact that this proposed application will have on our neighborhood. In a CBC radio interview yesterday, our council representative, Anna Hopkins, said it is all about finding the right balance. We couldn't agree more. However, I'm here today to say this is not the right balance. It may be our community, but this is also our neighborhood. It's our front yards and our backyards. We understand a great number of people have come forward to oppose this proposed infill. This in itself should not go unnoticed by this committee, especially our council representative, Anna Hopkins. We have reviewed the application as well as the applicant's reports and drawings, both original and revised, and are not confident that at the end of the day, that what has been applied for will actually be built. Given that in the conceptual rendering notes, excuse me, in the notice of the planning application, it says that the above images represent the applicant's proposal as submitted and may change. May change. This raises red flags for us. In their prior zoning bylaw request a couple years ago, We found that the applicant to be non-compliant with request and were not being honest in their factful documents presented. We felt many inconsistencies and inaccuracies were presented. The reports did not accurately reflect or represent the community and our neighborhood. The R57 zoning that is being requested now, and as noted, allows for a maximum density of 60 units per hectare. It says the proposed development will be 52. Again, we are not confident that this applicant will keep this build to a 20-unit townhouse units. They are also trying to achieve more units by stacking the townhouses. This land with its slopes and neighboring properties is more suited for 1 or 2-story units, not their proposed 3-story units. In addition, the allocated parking spots in their proposal just meet the minimum allowance. Come winter time, they will have far less parking spaces available. Where will they park? Where will their visitors park? There is no guarantee, there is no parking allowed on our street. I can almost guarantee, I see it now, regardless of any enforcement, they will stop on the street and park on the street. This will create further headaches and block the bike lanes. We are not opposed to development or intensification in our neighborhood. However, we do not believe the proposed application suits our Byron community, or more importantly, our neighborhood. In conclusion, and once again, we are urging this committee to recommend to council that this zoning application be denied. We are encouraging the committee to review the comments and feedbacks received to date from our concerned neighbors. A tremendous amount of people have written in, and this should not be ignored. Before I conclude, I just want to add a couple things. I noticed that Catherine in her initial intro said that there's 2 garages on the property not in use. They're absolutely in use. They are used every day. These are storage units they use for their business. So they're in and out of there constantly throughout the day and on the weekend. I just can't believe that planning is trying to recommend going through with this amendment, given even Greg's comments that it's not much different than the original one. I don't feel their objectives are sincere. It comes down to the almighty desire.
Can I just interrupt you there? I wonder, you've made a couple of comments that accuse the developer of being dishonest and now insincere. I just want to caution you, please, that we don't ascribe nefarious or dishonest motives. We'll be respectful. Please just be respectful.
I'm just going back on some of the notes that even City Hall had made with respect to some of the things that happened in the last one. So yeah, those are probably not chosen words, and I'll take them back, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for interrupting. Are you finished?
That's okay. So that's basically it. I just want to thank you for your time and consideration.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to let Mr. Schultes here speak.
Thank you, and sorry for the interruption. Through the chair, the transcriptionist services are no longer required. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great. And I just want to say, I apologize. I keep going to the members that are here in the gallery. We don't have microphones here in the gallery, so obviously people that have chosen to sit in the gallery are people that don't wish to address the committee. And if I'm wrong about that and you want to speak to the committee, somebody will take you back to one of the committee rooms where you can speak into a microphone so it will be heard on the record. So now I'll go to committee room 1. If you want to state your name, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is John McClay. I live at 14 September Lane, and my backyard bordered on the proposed building site. My first thought of the proposal is my disappointment in the lack of community involvement in building that Brandy Group has demonstrated in building their proposal. This leaves the community no choice but to voice our concerns in this public forum. On page 4 of their planning justification report, Brandy Group states, a neighborhood meeting is anticipated to occur in the latter part of 2019 or in the early part of 2020. This has not happened. We all understand that actions speak louder than words. This is equally true for non-actions. Their non-actions in any community involvement demonstrate this statement as shallow words that do not stand the test of time. This is the second time we have dealt with Brandy on the proposal for the same site. For the first proposal, we hosted community meetings and invited Brandy to speak at those meetings. No dialogue has occurred on this new proposal. When I attended the Planning and Environment Committee meeting in August 2018, when the city reviewed the previous Brandy proposal, we sat through many other builder proposals, including a sensitive Soho development plan. In all other cases that evening, the builder not only involved the community in their proposals, but the community was at the meeting to share their support for the proposal. It seems so right. This lack of discussion with Brandy Group leads us to a lack of transparency and therefore the distrust. I have asked Ms. Lowry about 12 questions about the site. Many of the answers just finally came back. That is something that will be determined at the site planning level. And I worry that we will continue to not have a voice at this table if it gets processed. On page 10 of the urban design brief, there's a statement: the natural site vegetation / cedar hedge provides as a screen and buffer for the 2-story towns at the back of the site. As Greg pointed out, this is a row of cedar trees, not a hedge. As such, it does not meet the privacy statements claimed in the urban design brief. The cedar trees do not provide privacy at the desired eye level. That's called at 0 to 10 feet. If the trees survive the construction, the privacy benefits of the trees do not come down, they only go up. If the proposal proceeds, there is planting required on the north side of the cedar trees to obtain the privacy screen and buffers the builder describes. I would now like to talk about the footprint. I find it impossible to believe this proposal is not too big for the property. Why else would 3 zoning provisions be required? 1 for the height of the first row of townhomes, 1 for the height of the second row of townhomes, and a 3rd for the parking area setback. So in other words, we want to build the first building taller than the rules allow. We want to build our second building taller than the rules allow. And subsequently, we have so many people on the site that we can't park there without stretching the parking boundaries. It is clearly too big. My request of you is that you do not approve this rezoning, decline this request, and ask Brandy Group to develop a new proposal in conjunction with the community that allows intensification without building code allowances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak to this? In committee room 5, come to the microphone, state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
I stand. I'm going to sit. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Your Worship, and council members and committee members. My name is Julie Lee. I live in the Heritage Designated Home directly abutting on the west side of the proposed development. I want to make it clear that I adopt all of the submissions that have been made by my neighbors with respect to concerns regarding this proposal. I'm not going to repeat the concerns, but I do want to emphasize a couple of things. One, I'm glad to hear some discussion with respect to the geological integrity of our well. That well is well over 100 years old and is many feet down into the ground. We depend on that for our day-to-day water. We do not want to be in a situation where we're forced to redress some harm to that well, and we will hold both the city and the developer accountable if that does happen. The difficulty here is, and we've heard this theme, the difficulty here is that we're not sure that our concerns are being heard or being responded to, which puts us in a very, I would say, opposing kind of relationship with the developer, which is very unfortunate. Our neighborhood supports infill. It supports the expansion of the availability of housing to Londoners and welcoming new Londoners. But the relationship with this developer has been extraordinarily poor. What I see that is different today is that it appears that the young Baranis, and it was nice to hear from them today, have developed a good relationship with the city. That's an improvement over the first go at the development, but they have failed to similarly develop a relationship with the neighbors. So we have to fight about things as to what the definition of a tree is as compared to a hedge, because there's not truth-telling about the fact that the privacy that they're relying on in the existing cedar trees will be enough to respond to the community. They're not telling, oh, I know, what is not what is not happening here is an open and frank discussion with the neighbors about what's a tree and what's not a tree, what's a hedge, how do you propose to keep our privacy, how do you propose to deal with our well. So what I'm asking for is, I recognize that there is procedurally a difference between the input at site planning and at this point. I think that the flaw at this point is, as set out by my friends and my neighbors, and in particular, what we have to be mindful of is a much more open and consultative process. For those reasons, I'm requesting that the committee at least adjourn this decision until that kind of consultation has occurred, and alternatively to deny the request. Those are my respectful submissions. Thank you for hearing me. Oh, and happy Pride.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? In any of the committee rooms, anyone wish to speak? Here we are. Oh, that's the clerk. So nobody in number 5 or no members of the public who would still like to speak to this application? Okay. I'm seeing none. I see no movement. I will look to the committee then to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Turner. We are closing the public participation meeting, and I will call the vote on that. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay. I will go to the ward councillor first, if she would like to make some comments or questions.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think I'd like to just follow up with a question that I have, and this may have to go to the applicant regarding the retaining wall that is going to be proposed. And I'm not sure if I can ask the applicant since we've closed the PPM, but given the comments from Mr. Thurston and other comments about that, the hedge or the trees at the back and the importance of retaining them, and the applicant acknowledging that a retaining wall would be put up to protect that hedge tree. I just want to understand a little bit more about what this retaining wall looks like. I know that's probably a site plan conversation, and as you can see, there's a number of outstanding matters that still have to be dealt with, and a lot of it revolves around the site plan process. But I think the fact that it was mentioned by the applicant, I would like to know a little bit more about that.
So I'll first check with Ms. Lowry if she can provide any kind of comments on this, this retaining wall. Ms. Lowry, are you there with us?
Through you, Madam Chair, I apologize. I was just taking my computer off mute. With respect to the retaining wall specifically, that, as you mentioned, is more of a site plan matter, and we haven't had discussions specifically on that retaining wall through the rezoning.
So if the applicant is able to answer Councillor Hopkins' questions, you can go ahead.
Yes, so basically over the course of the last 8-9 months, we've been discussing with our engineer at AGM Engineering and Surveyors about how we can fit the site vegetation around the perimeter of the property with the grading of the site. So basically what they recommended was to build along the southern part, along the southern line and the eastern line where the easement will be, to just put in a retaining wall that will protect the trees. And in fact, we've actually had to, since the original site plan, we've had to change the site plan quite a bit in order to move the parking lot on the easement further west and the buildings on the south towards September Lane further north to accommodate for the retaining wall. So we actually have been working pretty diligently on that. It's in the planning justification report in the appendices where the AGM has their site plans and the engineering, and it shows the trees, all of the existing trees within the retaining wall perimeter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. And I know this is more of a conversation through the site plan process, but as we approve zoning to allow for this, I think it is an important conversation to have at zoning about the retention of these trees. I want to thank the applicant for that response, and that work is being done to look at doing everything that is important to preserve that tree hedge southerly border area. And I heard from the applicant it's going to be to the east as well. I think I'm prepared to make a few comments here as well, Madam Chair, if you just allow me just to start this conversation. I am looking to my committee members for their comments as well. As you know, infill projects are tough, and they're very challenging because they do and will create a change in the community. And it is really, for me, important to have those conversations and those relationships with staff, the applicant, and the community to continue. That is ultimately what infills should be about. It's not clear cut, and every infill project is quite different, and the concerns you hear over and over again are about the trees because they are mature. These communities have been around a long time. So I want to start off with, I guess, thanking the applicant for bringing this application to planning. I appreciate being able to comment on this application, and I have heard from the community the many challenges. And regardless, this definitely for me will, I'll be asking for an H5 holding provision to be put on this, wherever this may go, because it is, as you can see in this recommendation, some outstanding issues, and they are, as we approve zoning, important to the community. So a H5 holding provision will allow the community to have another public participation through the site plan process to give further comments. So I'm going to put that right on out there. I would like to encourage the applicant as well. We do not have and again, this is a site plan conversation, but an idea of the retention of trees and the hedge. I would encourage that as many trees be saved as possible. I can see that we're asking as well, or the city staff are encouraging that we have an enhanced provision for boundary landscaping along the east and west to add additional screening and privacy qualities. This is really important because for me, when you go along Byron Baseline, and I run this route many times, and I run up a hill and down a hill when I pass this property. So the elevation, and this is my challenge. How does this development fit in there? It conforms, as you can see, to our zoning changes. Everything is appropriate, 60 units. There's no concerns there meeting our requirements. And that becomes the challenge for me as the councillor. I also want to bring to committee's attention the importance of having that holding provision 183 for the monitoring of this well. And we heard from the owner of that heritage building right on that west side the importance of having that in place. And as this development proceeds, that it be monitored and looked at. That is ultimately very, very important. And so with that, Madam Chair, I think I'll reserve my comments and with my wrap up, but for me, again, how does this fit, how we balance policies with the community's requests and concerns is difficult to do at times. So I'm looking forward to comments from my committee members, and I'll wrap up after that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments from committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this does seem to hinge on a few things. The comments that we've heard from the community seem to center around a few items. One, scale of development. Two, the separation and privacy that afforded to adjutting properties. The third being the level of consultation and communication between the applicant and the community. So those, I think, are the ones that, a couple of those, in terms of privacy and adjacencies, those are addressed best in site plan, but the density and the intensification and that consultation component, could we get what is exactly the level of obligation, through you, Madam Chair, that the applicant has to consult with the community at the pre-application phase and right up to the point that it's heard in a public participation meeting?
Is that for Ms. Lowry?
Sounds like a good place to go, Ms. Lowry.
So Ms. Lowry, what are the applicant's obligations for public consultation?
Through you, Madam Chair, a community information meeting, while often with applications for infill like this, is encouraged, but it is not a requirement of the Planning Act. The requirements of the Planning Act are to give notice of the application and to give notice of the public meeting. Those, of course, were fulfilled.
Thank you. Certainly, the encouragement is a very important part. I recognize that over the past few months, such opportunities for engagement are a little limited, but I think this precedes that to some degree, and it certainly is a valid comment to hear from the community that that engagement is a very important component of any applicant looking for a smoother process that's coming through the application of any buildings such as these. The second question I had was with respect to our policies on intensification. So this is a zoning bylaw amendment application. It is not an official plan amendment application. And I'm parsing the difference there for the community who seem like a very well-informed group. They've presented well-informed and respectful of our official plans and policies. They reflect those in the comments they've made. But in this circumstance, the land is designated as low-density residential. It is not an application to change that to medium-density multifamily residential. It's maintaining the low-density residential, but is applying for intensification under those policies. So multifamily, medium-density multifamily residential allows for units up to 75 hectares per unit, or units per hectare, sorry. And the intensification policies on low-density residential allow us to go up to 75 units per hectare. Where do we, I guess, kind of make those contemplations between thinking of an application like this, which does seem to fit under that, that umbrella of medium-density multifamily residential, rather than specifically low-density residential? It's certainly an intensification in the low-density residential place type or category. how do we kind of, I don't want to use a metaphor here. How do we work through that between the desire to move towards a official plan amendment where we say, okay, the higher intensity is more compatible and requires or needs to have compatibility, and so would need to have an official plan amendment, versus availing ourselves of the opportunity to use the intensification policies, the low density residential policies?
That's for you, Ms. Lowry.
Madam Chair, Michael Thomasin's here. Perhaps I'll chime in to start this conversation.
Perfect. Go ahead, Mr. Thomasin.
Thank you. The first indicator is the numbers, the numerical value, so the 75 units per hectare. Both the medium density allows 75 units per hectare, and in the low density, when it's a infill situation, both allow that. So when an applicant is proposing something that is within that density, it's hard to compel an official plan amendment when they're within that numerical value. What we then do, though, is through the application process and through the community consultation and various other agencies that provide input, we try to shape the development to meet the other policies in terms of fit and form. And that's what happened in this case. I believe Ms. Lowry indicated in her initial introduction that there were many more units proposed and a different configuration. And through the process, when we were processing this application, we worked with the applicant after hearing input from the community to actually reduce the number of units to provide a better form and fit within the community. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I think that's very helpful. So further to that, one of the intensification policy requirements includes a neighborhood character statement. And I recognize that this went through urban design and the urban design peer review panel and a heritage impact. Oh, actually, I'm looking at letters from people. So to what degree was a neighborhood character statement or assessment done?
Madam Chair, that is a process, a document that's submitted by the applicant, much like all the other reports and studies that were submitted. And then they get reviewed by our professional staff, our urban designers and our planners and our heritage staff. And they also get vetted through committees of council, such as the London Advisory Committee on Heritage and the Urban Design Peer Review Panel. So the initial reports are actually done by the applicant, but they get reviewed by planning staff for their content and make sure that they are compatible with the context.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So one was completed for this application that was consistent with the application that's before us.
Perhaps I'll let Mrs. Lowry answer the specifics of this.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, a neighborhood character statement and compatibility report was prepared through the planning justification report and was reviewed by both planning and urban design staff through the review of the application.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't find that in the report there, so I just wanted to make sure that that requirement had been completed. I'd imagine that that's the basis under which the Urban Design Peer Review Panel has made its recommendations, and Urban Design has worked with the applicant to reflect those components. So I just wanted to make sure that those elements were there. So I guess by matter of comment on this, this committee sees a good number of intensification applications. My comments earlier about neighborhood consultation and engagement, I think the applicant should hear those comments and understand the friction that occurs when they bring forward an application without market or material, I guess, meaningful discussion with the community. As noted by some of the residents, the the applications where there has been a good engagement between the community and the applicant, those tend to go a lot smoother here than otherwise, and that's also reflected by the fact that we've had one round through LPAT on this file to begin with. So I think it'll be really important as we move forward. I didn't see offhand if I don't think actually an H5 was recommended for this. Given the lack of community consultation from what I've heard so far, I would recommend that an H5 holding provision be placed on this file to compel some discussion leading up to a public process on the site plan that will give some assurance that that the concerns, a lot of those tended to be site plan type concerns that we heard from the community, are engaged and reflected in the ultimate site plan that gets approved. I think that's an important piece. As to the intensification, I see the change from what the original application was to this one as an appropriate one. I recognize that won't please the community. I think it's a scale that is appropriate. I think any level of intensification is usually going to be met with some resistance, and I recognize that, and I understand it's a material change to the neighborhood, and it does go with impacts. It's not to say that intensification does not have impact on a neighborhood. However, our policies are such that we need to encourage it where it's possible. We need to identify parcels where that can be done, where the impact can be kept in a degree that is compatible, which is why we have the peer review panel and the urban design staff and the components of applications which are required when doing intensification. It sounds like those have been mostly met, but I think that that neighborhood engagement is a really essential part whenever doing an intensification project within a neighborhood. So at the appropriate time, I do support the application for the zoning, but I think it does require an H5 holding provision. So I would support that or move that at the appropriate time.
Any of the other committee members wish to chime in on this? Questions or comments? Looking at my screen. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I was certainly on the committee when we dealt with the appeal to LPAT, and I supported the appeal, and I was glad that the city was successful in defending that position. You know, I thought at that time that the proposal was a bit too intense, and that there were some issues with what had been proposed for this particular property. I agree with Councillor Turner that this level of intensification, which is quite substantially less than what was initially proposed. Initially, we were looking at around 71 units per hectare, and now it's down to 52 units per hectare. Just to put it in the context of the overall neighborhood, the townhouse development is further west, further east. I get turned around. You know, that's around 24 units per hectare. There's a lot of units in there, but it's also a pretty large piece of property. So, you know, I think that's a appropriate kind of transition. I think 2- and 3-story buildings in an area that's got a lot of 1-story buildings, I think that's a good kind of transition. I think the change to have the 3-story buildings out towards the street and the shorter buildings more towards the rear is the kind of transition that we want to see in intensification proposals, where you're backing onto an existing lot. And I think that's responding to the context of the neighborhood much better than the previous one did, even though it was the building was way out at the front. I think having the transition, even visually, it will be a little bit better than having the just the one building on the site. So I support the idea of an H5. I think that's reasonable. And I think it's one of the unfortunate consequences of, you know, deciding to take something to the LPAT directly and not being successful is that some of the trust that might have existed otherwise is lost. And so I think people are looking to make sure that everything is followed, you know, to a T. And I appreciated what the applicant said at the beginning of the meeting. I think it sounds like the applicant's got a good attitude in terms of this development and how to approach it. I think having the public H5 site plan meeting will give the community and the applicant one more opportunity to look over the details of the proposal before things start to be built. And I think that would be helpful in getting everybody on the same page. I don't gather from the comments we had in our documents and what I've heard tonight that the community is going to be happy if the intensification goes forward. But I think we want to make sure it's done as well as possible and it's as sensitive as possible given the intensification that is proposed. So, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen with the trees along the back boundary. Making sure that all those things are protected. That's stuff that will be dealt with through site plan. And so I support the idea that was raised by the ward councillor to have the H5. I also think the holding provision, the 183 about the hydrogeological is also very important. And, I want to emphasize that the development's not going to go ahead until that is satisfied and that staff are convinced that there's protections in place for that. So I know that's a concern and it should be of concern to the folks in the community. I think they were quite right to raise that. And I think the holding provision, the 183 is a good measure to put in place. So we make sure that that's done well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments from committee who have not spoken yet? Nope, not seeing any. I'm just going to make a couple of comments. As committee members have mentioned so far, we see a lot of these applications for infill and intensification. I know Councillor Hopkins and myself, we saw these applications before we ever sat on council. It's kind of what the impetus was for us to run for city council, because we had these kinds of applications in our own neighborhoods. Change is very difficult when we have an established neighborhood and we like things the way they are, and then when a proposal comes forward that seems like a drastic change to what we've been used to, it's hard. And I've been on that other side, so I know exactly what the neighborhood is talking about when they talk about these. And when you come forward and you bring these issues directly to the city planning staff and to the committee and to city council, it's a really good thing to raise the awareness, because nobody knows your neighborhood better than you know your own neighborhood. So this is what is leading to the committee members to talk about this H5 holding provision. That's a holding provision. Normally, if a rezoning application gets approved by city council, it goes to the site plan phase, and that's where the nitty-gritty details get dealt with, like where the driveway is going to go, where the garbage bins will be located, all of those sorts of things. What fencing will be put up, whether the trees will be preserved and to what extent, and all of that, landscape planning. And that usually happens after a rezoning application goes through, and it happens between city staff and the developers, and it sort of happens behind the scenes. When we put an H5 holding provision on a file, that means we have another public meeting like this one, and it allows the public to come and again provide more input and have a say in the site plan matters. As Councillor Turner mentioned, what this will also do is provide the applicant with an opportunity to actually engage with the community. It seems like it had been a lost opportunity. Sometimes on city council, we're not aware of a planning application until it's a formal application. Sometimes an applicant gives the ward councillor a little bit of a heads up to let us know, hey, we're planning on this in your ward. And when that happens, I always say to the applicant, you must have a community meeting. You must engage with the community. And that's where a lot of really good dialogue takes place. That's where issues and concerns can be addressed right at the start. So I would encourage the applicant to do whatever they can to engage with the community before the site plan process actually begins, before the applications are filed for that. So Councillor Hopkins made, she's going to wrap up. She made some comments that made me think she's going to make a motion here that would include an H5. And also, and I don't know if it would be in the Part B here, where it talks about enhanced provision of boundary landscaping, but you also mentioned something about wording possibly to say to retain as many trees as possible that are already existing on the site, because the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and second best time is today. So I will go to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my committee members. I always appreciate your comments and your thoroughness and your listening skills as well. I really appreciate the work that you do here, and your comments are very much appreciated. I just want to wrap up, I guess. Thank you for supporting the H5. I'm hoping that we'll get support, that would go in the motion, as well as retaining as many possible trees on the property. It's good to know that the staff have commented about the need to enhance tree plantings on this property. Really, it's all about the south and the east and the west, creating that privacy and that buffering that is really needed in this community. It is an infill project, and I would like to add that to it to encourage the retaining of as many trees as possible. And I wanted to just comment about the intensification. So as we balance out, this is the tough part, policies that allow to do this go forward, and how it's going to work. And this is my dilemma, and I appreciate the community being here in the gallery and in the committee rooms. I'm so glad that you're here listening to us and speaking to the concerns. That is so vital in community engagement that must and continue regardless of pandemics or not. So thank you very much for being here. I am going to, acknowledge that the applicant has reduced the units. Started at 38, we're down to 28. Intensification isn't, to me, the problem. It's how does it fit? I've heard from the community. They're not convinced. I'm not convinced. I won't be supporting it. The application, I'm glad to see that there is support for the H5. And again, I want to thank the community for coming out as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'm going to go to Councillor Turner next. I did want to make one more comment. One of the residents from the area had made a comment that we hear a lot of: how can the city even consider this application? And when my residents from Ward 5 make that comment to me, I have to educate them. Under the Provincial Planning Act, under the provincial policy statement, or two pieces of provincial legislation, we have to, the city staff and city council must accept an application and consider it and render a decision. So any landowner has the right to make an application to rezone their land or to amend the official plan as far as what their land is used for. And city council has to render that decision. And we have to do it within a certain number of days. And if we don't fulfill that obligation, as we saw in this situation, a landowner can appeal that to the Land Use Planning Tribunal and ask that tribunal, made up possibly of non-members of our own community, from people from elsewhere, can then make a decision on what's best for London. So the ideal is that city council, working with the community, makes the decisions for how lands are used within the city limits. And if we don't meet the obligations within a certain time frame, then somebody else makes that decision for London. So we don't like to see that happen. And with that, I will go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move the staff recommendation with the amendment that an H5 public consultation for site plan holding provision be included. I think as we take a look here, the matters in Clause B, the following site plan matters have been raised through the application review process. These are the matters that we heard through the public submissions, both in writing and in delegation today. So I think those matters are reflective of what we heard and are appropriate for referral to the site plan process.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second? And that is moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
No.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
So I want to thank the members of the public that came out for this matter, and I want to thank the 4 members of the public that spoke to this committee as well. There will be another public meeting for this matter, and it will happen in a number of months. It usually takes, sometimes it takes approximately a year before the site plan public meeting is heard, but there will be another public meeting and you'll receive a notice advising you of the date and the time of that meeting. So I need, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we would be changing the order, and I would like to see if there would be a committee member who would make that motion. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Holder. And I'll call the vote to change the order. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga. Yes. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so that we're going to jump ahead then to item 4.1, and that is the Silverleaf Subdivision Sidewalk installation. It's an added item, and it is a request for delegation status. I would look to committee to see if they would like to accept this request for delegation status at this meeting or a future meeting. Councillor Hopkins.
Madam Chair, I would suggest that we accept the delegation as they are here, and I'm happy to move that.
Okay, do I have a second? Seconded by Mayor Holder, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'm not sure what committee room the delegates are in, but I would look to, I believe it's Mr. Galizia, who will be speaking to the committee. If you want to come to the microphone, confirm your name, I believe that's Mr. Galizia, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Robert Galizia, and I'm representing the residents of Silverleaf, in particular, Silverleaf Chase and Silver Creek Crescent. Appreciate your time and your consideration of this matter. Just very brief overview. The subdivision, it's a new one. It's on the southwest corner of Pack Road and Colonel Talbot. The construction's been ongoing in the subdivision. Home construction's been ongoing for roughly 2 years. A little over a week ago, I think, give or take a couple of days, we were advised, contrary to what we had all been previously told, and builders were told, that there is a sidewalk being installed on the east side of Silver Leaf Chase and on the inside of Silver Creek Crescent. For most of us that already live there, we have, completed driveways and irrigation systems, what have you. But I just want to be clear that we're not here requesting, we weren't here requesting delegation status because of any financial impact. We're not concerned about that for the simple fact that based on the developer having told individual homeowners and or builders that there were going to be no sidewalks, we will obviously look to the developer for any financial impact if we can't get this resolved. Our issue is more of a safety concern. Very narrow streets on in both cases, Silverleaf Chase and Silver Creek Crescent. They're 6 meters wide, roughly, approximately 20 feet converted. Great difficulty right now in vehicles going up and down those streets, aside from the fact that there is ongoing construction. When the pandemic hit and construction basically shut down, we still had significant issues. On numerous occasions, I haven't had garbage or recycling pickup because there's cars parked on the street. When you have cars parked on both sides, cars can't get through. And so in several cases, they've just backed down the street and left. So our concern, of course, is for all the kids that live in those neighborhoods. It's a very young, I'm the old guy on the street. There's lots of young kids that live on the street, and you know, the front yard's the playground, of course. And so we're concerned for that. We're concerned about emergency vehicles gaining access to the properties when required. We're concerned about other transportation vehicles such as buses, paratransit, et cetera, having to access, having ease of access up and down the road. So absolutely, I just wanted to make it clear that our concern is more of a safety concern. It's not of a financial concern. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes if you had anything else to say.
No, I think that was a good summary. We submitted a document, I think, which provides a very good overview of the situation and all the issues we're facing here.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I wonder if there is anyone from staff who would like to speak to the committee about this issue.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think as the committee can likely appreciate, when we're building out a subdivision, we're working in conjunction with the developer and the home builder. We're implementing council's policies and engineering standards, but we're also trying to address some of those day-to-day challenges that a homeowner living in a multi-year construction site, which is what a subdivision building out is. It can be noisy, it can be dirty, it can be very challenging to move around with all the construction traffic. But the homeowners are also going to be subjected to construction staging as the various components of the subdivision are installed through the build-out. It isn't always practical to install all the components of the subdivision design right away. For example, to protect trees, we've moved their installation to when the subdivision is assumed to give them a better chance to take root. The same can be said for sidewalks, which as a concrete truck, for example, pouring a foundation, if it's backed up and sitting on the sidewalk isn't constructed or built to sustain that the weight of the truck. So I think the committee would probably like to hear a little bit from staff on the submission that was provided by the residents. So there's quite a bit to unpack. I'm not going to answer each individual point specifically, and I'll deal more in themes. So the themes that I saw was the policy implementation, the subdivision agreement conditions and how that transfers, the engineering design and the building permit process, and Mr. Galizia already referenced the overview of the current situation. So despite the status of the London Plan policies, in this area of the city, the Southwest Area Plan Act policies are actually in force, and those policies require two-side sidewalks. So we're actually implementing the swap in this case, not the London Plan. With respect to the subdivision agreement, that's actually a contract between the city and the developer to build out the subdivision. It's registered on title against every lot in the plan and transfers from the developer to the builder, builder to homeowner, and then each subsequent homeowner. And that includes the engineering drawings, conditions, and schedules which specifically identify and reference these sidewalks. The developers are responsible to ensure that the plans and those agreements are implemented, and in many cases, they often take security from builders to ensure some of those minor grading works that are carried out in accordance with approved plans. So if a sidewalk does go in, they may have taken securities in order to address that. I would suggest, and perhaps my colleagues in legal may be able to jump in as well, but I think the developer would have very strong legal grounds to recover costs if this element was removed from our subdivision agreement. With respect to the engineering design, the sidewalks are part of a system, and that includes curb and gutter and grading of every lot to convey stormwater, but it also incorporates parking, utility locations, trees, and streetlights. And this was very thoughtfully accounted for through the design of the subdivision. In fact, the developer challenged the installation of two-side sidewalks, and staff pushed back very hard and said, no, this is absolutely a requirement. And the engineering drawings reflect that there are two sidewalks on both sides of all the streets. With respect to the safety and the on-street parking, it is a smaller traveled portion of the right-of-way, and it can seem constrained, but that is a best practice traffic calming measure. With a constrained right-of-way and parking on the street, drivers actually drive a little bit slower, and that traffic calming is actually part of our Vision Zero, which is to eliminate traffic fatalities citywide. In regards to the building permit, so it's a little, there's a nuance here between the way the building code and the subdivision agreements are delivered. The building inspector does not actually deal with the items that are in the public right-of-way. They only are addressing items on the private property. So the installation and inspection of the sidewalk is not actually in their purview, and the sidewalk is dealt with through the subdivision agreement. I've gone back and reviewed a sample of the building permits for the homes on the inside of Silver Creek Crescent and Silverleaf Chase. And in those building permits, on the lot grading component of the permit, it actually does show sidewalks to be installed in those places. So it has been accounted for as part of when the home builder was in charge of the lot or owner of the lot. As the resident noted, there are some driveways that have been installed. So some are stamped concrete driveway, and it's very difficult to match color and pattern if you do need to replace a portion of that driveway. As he also mentioned, there's likely irrigation installed, and in some cases we may even have some heated driveways out here. And there's probably some elaborate landscaping as well, and that could potentially be impacted by the sidewalk installation. I think that's a pretty good summary. I don't know if the committee has any other questions. I'd be happy to answer those.
Oh, I see Mr. Kokoros has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I do have my virtual hand up. What I wanted to do is further supplement what Mr. Feldberg just told you about the building permit process. I'd also want to make a clarification for the members of the committee that with respect to the attached submission from the area residents, there was mention about driveways also being under the purview of the building inspector or the Ontario Building Code. And what I'd simply want to clarify is the fact that while driveways may fall under a warranty item under Tarion, they certainly do not fall under the Ontario Building Code. The Ontario Building Code has no jurisdiction over driveways for any dwelling unit. And again, I just wanted to make that clarification, and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Kokoros. With that, I will go to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak to this. I did want to give the committee an update. I did hear from the concerns from the community, not only the owners of, there's about 12 properties that have completed driveways that were told that they weren't not getting sidewalks. And I'm not sure what that relationship or those agreements with the builder and the developer are, but I did want to underscore the fact that they did have concerns, not only residents that had put in the driveways, but residents that haven't and weren't dealing with the extra sidewalk still had safety concerns. There were a number of them. I met with the community Saturday morning. I have made a list of concerns like garbage and bikes and busing and parking, all those things that I will be following up with staff. So just to let committee members know that I will continue with that. I am very concerned about the implications to our subdivision agreement, and not only that, to swap our policies and other policies that we have with making changes to this. I think as the ward councillor, if I may, Madam Chair, I need good reasons, I guess, not to support not putting in another sidewalk on Silver Creek Crescent and Silverleaf Chase, because as we develop this very large subdivision development, there will be other residents moving in saying, why did we not get, why do we have to have two sidewalks? And I think it's very important, me as the councillor that I am, is transparent and consistent with the support that I have, not only to the London plan, but also to SWAP, which is the Southwest Area Plan. That really is that secondary plan that dictates how we develop, and trying to be consistent and supportive with the policies. So I just wanted to make those comments to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I jump in a quick question, Councillor Turner? There was something that Mr. Feldberg said about the developer could recover costs. I wonder if he could elaborate on that. Mr. Feldberg, where would they recover the costs from, and what would these costs be about?
Certainly, Madam Chair. So what the developers will do is when they sell the lot to the home builder, they actually take securities from the home builder as well, and they hold those until such time as, I'm not sure the exact timing, but I believe it's around assumption, or when there's occupancy provided through the building permit process. And then what they would do is, in some cases, they would use that security to deal with some of those grading matters. So where the property line is, which is roughly where the sidewalk will be going, if they need to match in the sidewalk with the driveway, the cost to do that would be covered through the securities that have been provided by the builder.
Okay, now we'll go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the resident for coming forward. I don't support the application that's being made here. I'm going to be quite clear about that. The petition being brought forward to us, I think, is a little misplaced. The conflict here seems to be one between the residents and the developer, not between the residents and the city. I'm disappointed to hear if it is the case that there was a communication to the residents that a sidewalk would not be installed, because that is completely contrary to the subdivision agreement that was put in place here. And as Mr. Feldberg identified, the applicant had actually sought relief, the developer sought relief from these sidewalks to this committee, and this committee rejected that. These sidewalks are essential. They are an integral component of the Southwest Area Plan, and in general, our official plan policies. I'm a little disappointed by some of the inflammatory language used in the petition here, such as how will that responsibility and accountability be fixed in the face of this gross failure of coordination and negligence on part of the city, the developers and builders. That's tough and a little frustrating. And so I would move that we receive the petition and take no further action.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a motion on the floor. 1 second, Councillor Kayabaga. First, I'll see if there's a second for that motion. Yep, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Kayabaga, go ahead.
It's okay. I wanted to second the motion that the councillor was moving.
My apologies. I will make you the second. Is that okay, Councillor Hopkins? Okay. Mayor Holder.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will not support the motion for a couple of reasons. Firstly, what hasn't come out, although it was in correspondence that we've received, and I can stand to be corrected, but currently there is a pending decision through LPAT on this, and it would seem to me to be prudent from our standpoint to wait until that resolution comes through. I'm exceptionally mindful that I'm not sure if we should be insisting on the installing the physical infrastructure truly until, and not just in this area here, but in the Southwest, which is the nature of the geographic area that's under reconsideration by LPAT, until we know where they stand. So that would be the first thing. And secondly, I'd remind colleagues that some members have been absolutely consistent on this committee about sidewalks, and I admire the consistency. But some have not. And what that means is there have been circumstances where sidewalks have been put in place against the will of the local area residents, and some which have not been put in place as a result of the will of the residents. So for those who've been consistent, I won't be changing your perspective, I'm sure, nor is it my place to do that. But I'm very mindful of the request of the residents in this case here. We are talking about smaller streets. Whether this is an issue between the developer and the homeowner, or the builder more likely than to the homeowner, which is where I think it is, in terms of whether or not they were advised with respect to sidewalks, to me is less material than it is what the issue will be as in terms of the pending decision of the LPAT appeal. And so I won't support it on the basis that I think we should, that they should wait until the LPAT appeal has been determined. And from there, I think a determination can be made. But we are not without our precedent, colleagues, with regard to having certain areas of our city where individuals have been able to go beyond the official plan. And here we have a situation where an appeal is pending, and I say wait at least for that. I think that would be respectful to these residents, and I think it would be prudent as well. Thank you, Chair.
So I see Mr. Barrett has his hand up. I'll go to Mr. Barrett first, and then Councillor Hopkins. And then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to address the Mayor's comment with respect to the LPAT appeal. In fact, what is under appeal is a single policy in LPAT that is before the board under the mobility section, and it actually speaks to the criteria as to where sidewalks would be applied, what street types or the conditions where sidewalks would be applied on two sides, and actually lists the exceptions. That policy is in fact under appeal, but there is a policy that is not under appeal that speaks to mobility and the fact that active mobility features will be incorporated into the design of new neighborhoods and, where possible, enhance in existing neighborhoods to ensure connections to the street and transit system. So that's in place. But I think actually to give the Mayor even more assurance is that there is not the reliance on the London Plan policy or any policy that might be under appeal in this instance. The Southwest Area Plan, which is in force in effect and has been through appeal, and through that appeal is in force in effect with policy that in fact is even, I would suggest to you, more stringent than the London Plan policies. And the Southwest Area Plan policy that is in force in effect says that sidewalks shall generally be required on both sides of all streets with the exception of, and it just gives two exceptions. One exception is residential streets with less than 10 dwelling units or cul-de-sacs where sidewalks would be required on only one side, and on lanes where no sidewalks would be required. So in fact, the enforced policies and the policies that apply to these lands are in place and are in fact provide fewer exceptions to two sides. So a concern that an LPAT appeal and where that might land with respect to criteria 4 exceptions to two-sided or sidewalks on two sides of the street wouldn't apply in this instance.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I'll go to you, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think Mr. Barrett, he basically has answered some of my questions around the Southwest Area Plan that I have. And as the councillor of the ward, I use almost as my Bible. It has been updated as of last year, and it's something that really it's our secondary plan, how we develop. Those are the policies. We also have other policies as well that we rely on. But when it comes to installing sidewalks on both sides of the street, it is in our Southwest Area Plan, and I understand that policy. Not that it is more important than our London plan, but it is dictating how we develop in the Southwest Area Plan. I just wanted to just make sure that we all understood how our policies work in the Southwest End.
Thanks, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question through the chair. I recall back in 2017, we were dealing with special provisions for the subdivision. And I wonder if, through the chair, planning staff could confirm whether those special provisions already include that there'll be 2 sidewalks on both sides of the street on the streets that we're talking about in the subdivision agreement itself.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Mr. Feldberg, I think.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and to the councillor. Yes, we do. In the schedule, it's very specifically identified that these streets are to have 2-side sidewalks, and that's further reflected in the engineering drawings and all the design that we did to incorporate all the utilities and various things in the right-of-way as well.
Thank you. So what I have to say about this petition is I can understand if people are surprised that they would react in a negative way. 3 years ago, we dealt with these special provisions at the Planning Committee, and we passed them. And that is a lot of time for people to know what they are and to know what they're getting into when they get into the subdivision. And, you know, it sounds like there's a communication gap somewhere along the line. The subdivision special provisions have been in place for years, and they require a sidewalk on both sides of the street. They also specify the width of the road, and the sidewalk is going to go on the other side, right? The pavement width has nothing to do with the sidewalk. The road allowance is 20 meters. The road itself is only taking up 8 meters. In the narrower streets, the road allowance is 18 meters, and the road is only taking up 6 meters. So the sidewalk is in the road allowance, which is the public part of the property. And, you know, the sidewalk is an important part of the mobility infrastructure. People who have purchased properties in this area expecting there to be sidewalks, for example, if they looked at the subdivision agreement or they had knowledge of this subdivision agreement, maybe react quite negatively if all of a sudden that's not the case anymore. And I think when we are designing these things, we're trying to implement policy for what reason? So that the most mobility infrastructure is available for the full range of people who live in the city and all the different ways they want to get around in their own neighborhood. So kids, when they go walking in the neighborhood, perhaps they want to walk on the sidewalk, roll their little trucks down the sidewalk. That's why we build sidewalks, so people have those options. Imagine somebody who is in a wheelchair, and that's how they're going to get around is by taking their wheelchair down the sidewalk. They don't want to be in the road with vehicles. We have to design the city so that it's available to the broadest range of people possible. That's why we have policies that say, let's put sidewalks in on both streets when we build them. Let's have sidewalks on one side of the street when we're retrofitting them in, and there's a lot of conflicts, and we will at least make sure there's something available for people. This is why we telegraph way in advance. Like the subdivision agreement has been in existence for a while, way in advance what is going to be required and what will be built in this area. And we've had back and forth on this subdivision for years at Planning Committee. So, you know, I'm not convinced that the sidewalk needs to be taken out at this point. I'm in favor of it going in. I have always been in favor of it going in on both sides of the street.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other comments or questions about this? Okay, I just want to say, it looks like everything has been done properly, not only by city staff, but also by the planning committee and city council, from start to finish in this situation. The plan has always been in place that there would be sidewalks on both sides of the street. There are ample opportunities for every single person that purchased in this subdivision to know that there would be sidewalks on both sides of the street. And the fact that it falls under the Southwest Area Plan, which was appealed, and the city was successful in winning that appeal for the Southwest Area Plan, and the policies of the Southwest Area Plan, including the sidewalks on both sides of the street, that all gives great strength to this subdivision being built according to the provisions that were agreed upon by the developer from the very beginning, from start to finish. So I agree with the comments of my colleagues. It is a different situation to retrofit a sidewalk on one side of a street in a 50, 60-year-old subdivision than to build sidewalks that have always been planned in a brand new subdivision as part of the build out of that subdivision. And I will check and see one more time if there are any comments or questions from any members of the committee. We have a motion on the floor. It's been, Councillor, no, it's been moved and seconded, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
No.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
With that, I will turn the chair over to my deputy chair, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the next item on the agenda is our final one. It's a public participation meeting with respect to 307 Fanshawe Park Road East. Did I get that right? East, yes. So I will take a motion to open the public participation meeting. I see a motion from Councillor Hopkins and seconded by Councillor Kaibaga. Any discussion? Seeing none, we will call the vote. Starting Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5 with 1 recused.
Thank you. With that, I'll go to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Heather McNeely speaking. I just wanted to make a quick introduction. Meg Sundercock is the site development planner and should be providing a brief presentation. Given the nature of the public matters that have been made for this site, we've also have with us in development services the landscape architect, Lisa McNiven, and manager of development engineering, Ismail Abu Shahada, for any technical questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ms. McNeely. So Mr. Sundercock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the development we're looking at today is at 307 Fanshawe Park Road East. The proposed development consists of 42 units in 2 buildings. The building fronting Fanshawe Park Road consists of 24 units stacked back-to-back townhouses, which is 12 meters in height. The building at the rear, which is oriented north to south, has 18 units and is 9.5 meters in height. The site was rezoned last year to permit cluster stacked townhouses at a maximum density of 75 units per hectare and a maximum parking rate of 1.25 spaces per unit. The applicant is proposing 42 units for a density of 75 units per hectare and 53 parking spaces at a rate of 1.25 per unit. Just speaking briefly to the application earlier that was dealt with as a consent item, the application was also subject to the request for delegation to permit an application to be made to the Committee of Adjustment to vary the definition of stacked townhouse, which will be subject to another public participation meeting. There were 3 zoning issues identified in my report. This was one of them. There was also an issue with an interior side yard setback. The applicant, Mr. Hannum, dealt with that earlier, that bump out, so to speak, is being removed from the building, so that addresses that zoning issue, as well as the setback of that accessory structure at the rear. The building height was confirmed, and it also complies with zoning. Going back to the rezoning from last year, the resolution of council included direction to the site plan approval authority for the protection of the trees and hedges on the boundary of the property, with the exception of invasive species or hazard trees. There have been a number of public comments on this application, and concerns have been raised primarily about tree preservation and stormwater management. Tree preservation has really been a key matter with this application, and currently the applicant is proposing to retain the hedges on site and 4 of the trees along the eastern property line. Staff are of the opinion that this does not comply with the council resolution. With respect to SWIM, stormwater management, as I mentioned, the proposed engineering solution meets our stormwater standards for the 250-year flood event. And so that's a brief overview of this application, and I'm happy to go into more detail and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sandercock. So I'll look to the committee for any questions of a technical nature. Okay, seeing none at this point, I will go to the applicant, a representative from the applicant. I'm not sure which committee room we're looking to, perhaps committee room 1, I think. And if you'd like to speak, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, members of committee. My name is Dave Hannum. I'm a planning consultant for Royal Premier Homes. Also speaking as part of our delegation is Mike Leonard, who's the principal landscape architect of Leonard and Associates, and also Kevin Moniz, principal engineer with Strict Portinelli Moniz. The majority of the time will be taken up by Mike talking about tree preservation, and then Kevin will speak at the end with regards to stormwater management. Obviously, there's a bit to go through within 5 minutes, so hopefully there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of timing while people come up and down. As you know, we provided as part of the agenda package. We provided some graphics that the delegates may refer to. They're on page 201 to 203 of the agenda. In terms of the SPA, we acknowledge that this is a collaborative process, and there are some refinements to make as we move forward to making our 3rd submission. We hope that all parties that you hear from tonight will acknowledge that the applicant has been willing to work with and meet and listen to the comments raised by staff, by the Urban Design Peer Review Panel, and particularly the local residents, and will continue to do so as well. So I'll hand it over to Mike, who will talk about tree preservation.
Thank you and good evening. Being Irish Catholic, 3 minutes usually doesn't even get me past hello. We'll try for better tonight. Once again, an interesting file, so to speak. Quickly, our guiding principles: not all trees are created equal, both within species and across species. They're like us. They're composed of an awful lot of water and an awful lot of actively divided tissues. Like us, they don't live forever. From time to time, in fact, they tend to develop characteristics that make them fall into the category of hazard trees. And we have several on this site. Just a partial correction. In one of the reports before you from staff, there was a figure cited that 4 trees are being kept. That's not the case. Of the 47 trees within the client site, we're keeping 60% of those. And of course, consistent with city site plan guidelines, adding 20 new ones. The matter at hand that I will dwell on in my remaining time, there were 6 trees of concern to the residents, the staff, and I'm sure the councillors. Of those 6 trees of concern, we're keeping 4 of them, removing 1 of them, and the 5th tree is still subject to a decision. The reason for that being, when myself and our consulting arborist, who peer reviews all of our work, disagree, we usually bring in a 3rd party, another consulting arborist, to cast a deciding vote. Very briefly, you will see, I think in your graphics package, the tree retention plan. There's a sugar maple, nice large size sugar maple on a neighboring property. We will be specifying a program of best practices and committed to protecting that tree. Further to the south, and these are both on the east side of the property, there is a large silver maple, tree number 14. In the old, less politically correct days, we used to call those widowmakers. This tree is a hazard in our view, and in the view of our consulting arborist. However, the owner that our client shares ownership with does want to retain that tree. Consequently, by law, we're bound to do that. I mean, it is possible to litigate because of its hazards, but our client has decided not to. We'll be accepting some risk, and in fact, I'll say great risk.
About 30 seconds left.
There is 2 beautiful bur oaks on the site, one on the city road allowance, a beautiful one at the south end of the site. The special drainage techniques will be used. And the only tree definitely for removal is a huge, large old silver maple that has to be 100 years old, that met its best date decades ago, and actually has a huge limb extending fully over the neighboring property to the south. That is an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen.
So that's about five minutes there. How much, we've got one more person to speak. About how long are you speaking, sir?
I should be able to wrap this up in about 30 seconds, I hope.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, committee. I'm Kevin Moniz of Strict Baldinelli Moniz, the site servicing engineer and grading engineer and stormwater management engineer for this project. Speaking specifically about the concerns related to stormwater management and snow storage as it relates, I think, to drainage and stormwater management. Firstly, stormwater management, I'll second Meg's comments there that, and thank you, Meg, we are currently meeting all of the city requirements for stormwater management. No, it's not accepted yet because site plan approval is not accepted yet. We've received second submission SPA comments, and we're down to 2 minor clarification items, which we will be addressing with our third submission. So we are conforming to city requirements on stormwater management. And regarding the snow storage, there are 2 areas on both the east and west sides of the property designated for snow storage on the site plan. There was concerns that runoff may melt and flood neighboring properties. The snow storage area on the west side of the property is located on top of a 6-inch deep conveyance swale with the intention of containing that drainage and directing it to a catch basin on property for stormwater management quantity controls. The area on the east was noted that snow storage is not on a surface swale. And although that is correct, it has about a 5% slope inwards towards our site onto the parking lot, where again, so it'll drain onto the our internal parking surface, and again to catch basins and to our stormwater management quantity and quality controls. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moniz. Look to the committee for any questions of the applicant of a technical nature. Seeing none at this time. So I will go to the community. There are members, I believe, in committee rooms 5 and 1 potentially right now. I'll start with committee room 5. Just as a parameters for public participation, we limit comments to 5 minutes. I will try to give you a 1-minute warning as you approach the 5-minute edge there. Also a reminder that this is for comments with specific to the site plan. So the zoning itself has been approved and has moved forward. So this is this really, if you can scope your comments specifically to the site and the site plan, that would be very helpful, and then that would help us in providing directions to the site plan approval authority. Also, as you come forward, if you can give your name and address for the committee, and we'll go with that. So I look to Committee Room 5. I have a gentleman standing right in front of the camera ready to go. So over to you, sir.
My name is Michael Crawford. I live on Camden. My name is Michael Crawford.
We'll try that again, I guess.
If I'm closer and it's quiet.
Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Crawford. I don't hear any feedback at this point, so you might be good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Michael Crawford. I live on Camden Place. Mr. Chair, Your Honor and councillors, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. We have sequenced our presentations together to save some time, and you can see the slides starting in your package on page 204. I'm going to be talking a little about the historical perspective, just to remind you that the community is indeed very supportive of infill development and the opportunity to intensify, particularly with regard to improving diversity and aging in place. And to this end, we were pleased when council approved rezoning with an amendment, and the amendment was a critical consideration because the intensity proposed was extreme for the size and shape of the lot. There are some really difficult constraints, not the least of which is that 83% of the perimeter of this property are embedded in R1 single resident dwelling, only 17% on Fanshawe. And what City Council requested was that the Planning Approval Authority work hard to preserve trees and hedges and privacy buffer essentially for the residents, and in addition to send the plan to UDPRP again for analysis. When this came under debate in City Council, Councillor Turner, thank you very much, asked for a clarification and asked if planning staff would read the recommendation as directive or as directive in nature or considerative. And the response from Paul Yeoman, Mr. Paul Yeoman, who's the Director of Development Services, was that it would be considered as a requirement of council. In further clarification, Councillor Turner queried the parking lot maximum. Is the applicant compelled to use 53 parking spots? And again, Mr. Yeoman responded that it was they were merely establishing a maximum. In other words, to quote again, it was a cap on the number of spaces. So on page 210 of your document, there's a picture of the revised site plan that sort of illustrates what the complexity of the situation is, because the site plan has changed in a fundamental way insofar as a new storage shed has been added and a central amenity space has been added to what was already a very packed configuration. And what this means is that it's hard to accommodate the buildings, the mass and form of which we approve, the size of the parking lot, 53, which is large, and the tree preservation plan. So basically something has to give. One of the things that has given in the first iteration of the plan submitted as part of this post-City Council amendment was all the trees were being removed. Nothing had changed. That's beginning to improve, and we're grateful to Meg Sundercock for insisting on preservation of trees. But another thing that has changed is that the snow storage space has been diminished and divided in two. And one of them sits on top of an area that has no swale. So for us, the big problem is that there are these extras being added that occupy a footprint that is denigrating or degrading the capacity for adequate snow storage and also what we consider to be appropriate tree preservation. So this involves the new storage shed, the central amenity area, and the tree preservation. Let me just sort of encapsulate the issue here. It's been improved to a preservation of 17 from 15 trees originally. The majority of these are on neighbors' property. Okay, so the numbers sound impressive, but really they're saying we're not going to damage neighbors' trees.
About a minute left.
And in order to sort of fit all of this stuff in, there have been issues with regarding encroachment. So the setback not respected in the front building, setback not respected with regard to the storage shed, which I infer from comments just made may have been taken into account in previous issue, the zoning amendment. And I'm going to stop there and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take your name and address for the committee, and welcome.
My name is Claudia Clausius. I live at 21 Camden Place. I think it's become clear that the trees are the issue about this development, and it's obvious why. Privacy will be enhanced if the trees are preserved. Invasive lighting will be mitigated. The danger of flooding will be significantly reduced. We don't want another wetter incident. And there is an added bonus. The quality of life for the future residents of the development will be enhanced. They too will have the benefit from the privacy, coolness, and fresher air that the trees will offer. We are very worried now with all the talk about which trees are suitable to save and which not. City Council's resolution regarding the tree preservation plan does not specifically stipulate what kind of trees ought to be saved. In fact, we already have a caution in the city's landscape comments that the developer's demolition of the old house did not respect trees or their roots. It's clear then that the trees are in danger of being destroyed if we do not put specific constraints in place. I would also like to challenge the invasive tree argument for the removal of trees such as, and I'm just taking this as an example, the Norway maple. The Norway maple was introduced in 1756. This is from Reforest, London, so it predates Confederation. The trees were specifically selected by London and elsewhere because they are fast growing, provide good shade, and survive well in the harsh city environment, unquote. This site is right beside Fanshawe Park Road, so it's a very suitable tree for the site. For their urban resilience, Norway maples are also London's most popular boulevard and park tree. Other examples of invasive species are spruce, Scotch pine, silver birch, weeping willow, many of which people buy from nurseries. As a comic aside, tomatoes and garlic are also an invasive species. More seriously, 52% of London trees are native. 48% are invasive, and no one would argue that we would want to cut down half of the London trees. London's Urban Forest Effects Model, otherwise known as U4, is an exhaustive report demonstrating how also invasive trees are critical to London's air quality, its carbon saturation, and its water absorption. I'm going to quote from page 2 of the U4 report, quote, "Management of the urban forest must establish green infrastructure as a primary step in urban design and development standards," unquote. So Council's requirement that the trees be preserved directly reflects this policy. Here are statistics from the U4 report with regard to the Norway maple. And again, I'm just taking this as an example. In a comparison of all London tree species, the total structural value of Norway maple is 9%, second only to the silver maple at 12%. Annual carbon storage of Norway maple is 7.8, second only to sugar maple at 8%, another tree the developer wishes to cut down. Now here is a sobering statistic. A full 1/4 of all carbon sequestration in London is accounted for by 4 species of large shade trees. Norway maple is second on that list. And perhaps more importantly, Norway maples are celebrated for soaking up excess amounts of water. And in the case here of a very large parking lot, excess water and snow melt will be absorbed by these trees. The current plan preserves only 3 trees just within the site's boundary. The so-called preserved trees belong to the neighbors. 10 trees are on the neighbor's property.
Just about
the
a
city
minute.
owns 1 tree, and there are 3 trees that are shared. In short, Council's tree preservation resolution is not reflected in the current plan. I'd just like to mention very briefly privacy and buffering. There's the plan, the development uses 18-foot poles with a maximum brightness of twilight. The fence around the property is 7 feet high, so there will be no proper darkness on and surrounding the site, not for the neighbors and not for the future residents. Twilight is not darkness, and public health officials frequently discuss the importance of circadian rhythms and sleeping patterns as necessary for good health. Luckily, there are many modern light options. Waist-high pole lights with LED lighting would be safe and only cast light where it is needed and not shine into people's residences. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So I would look to see if, and we do, now in committee room 1, if this is a continuation. It seems that everybody is very well timed, and so I might dispense with giving you the 1-minute warning so I don't interrupt you, but I will flag it at 5 minutes. So welcome, please state your name for the committee and address, and I will start your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Deborah Beverly, I live at 25 Camden Place. I'd like to begin my portion just by saying thank you very much for allowing us to speak and for the open dialogue with both the city and the developer and all of the people working on this development site. I want to just begin by talking about some of the inconsistencies and changes that have repeatedly been occurring that make it very difficult to debate, let alone consider approving this plan. Starting with something that was already addressed earlier, tonight, which we're grateful to hear about, but it's still concerning that it had to come to light in this way. And that is the original setback for building A, which was 4.9 meters, was supposed to have been 6 meters, but was approved at 4.9 during the rezoning phase. And I promise I'm not discussing rezoning. The issue though was that the building that was submitted for site plan actually had an encroachment, not at the main level where it did adhere to the 4.9 meters, but at subsequent levels of the building. And it's concerning to us that city and or residents have to be pointing these things out as opposed to them just being adhered to. It may be an oversight and we appreciate there's lots of details, but it's concerning to us to have to notice these things. The same building, building A, which fronts on Fanshawe Street, is very close to the western property line of the neighbors that surround it. And the original submission during zoning, the October 1st, 2019 minutes submission that was considered for zoning showed transom windows at the 3.5-story level. And this would have protected privacy for the residents on the western side, something that they deserve to have. The submission that's now before you with the site plan actually shows full-sized windows, and these rooms that the full-size windows exist on at this level are living room, dining room, and kitchens. So rooms that are going to be very frequently occupied and therefore afford no privacy for the residents on the western edge who might want to enjoy their backyards in the summertime. Continuing on the theme of privacy, and to note another inconsistency, the plan, there was a fence that runs along the west or the easterly edge of the property from Fanshawe, and it goes across 2 properties on the southern edge. That shows in the city submission documents on the website. But when you look for that same board-on-board privacy fence in your submission, I believe it's in your agenda package, it appears that that goes all the way around the property. So we're just wondering which is it. And we urge you and ask you to mandate that it be the board-on-board property fence around the entire circumference of the development. We've talked a little bit about the snow storage and the lack of swale. So it sounds like that's already open for me to discuss. Snow storage, if that's to remain on site in these 2 small spaces where it has gone from previously a 22-foot by 13-foot area space to now a small space on the inside of the driveway, incoming driveway to the property, and on the westerly edge of the property right by the amenity space. This is very, very small. We're really concerned that meters high of snow, if we have anything like this past snowstorm winter, it's going to be excessive. Even with a 5% grade, there is still a slope, not just into the parking lot as we've been told, but there's also one that goes down into the neighbors on the easterly side. Water is going to run off. It is going to impact in flood basements. And as much as we're grateful for assurances, the assurances aren't going to help us when people's basements, pools, and vegetation are all damaged and there's higher insurance premiums and repairs needing to be made. If snow was to be removed, which we know was something that was potentially discussed informally, We would be grateful for that to happen. We would appreciate that happening, but because of the history and the changes and the inconsistencies, we would be concerned to understand how would this be enforced? How do we ensure that future owners would be accountable for the same requirements? What are the repercussions for neighbors if it's not removed regularly? And what does a regular basis look like? The snow build up for 1 day, 5 days, 3 weeks. Again, the same kind of issues can happen with runoff and snow melt if we have inconsistent weather patterns. So all of these things need to be discussed, and we urge that they be very clearly detailed, outlined, and mandated, and that abilities to address any lack of adherence to would have a very formal, strict process for addressing and protecting the neighborhoods, as well as, and when I say neighborhoods, we're including the residents of the site that's being developed, not just the people surrounding. We're all going to be neighbors together, and we're all looking to have a good, strong community together. One other thing I wanted to point out about that helps outline why we want to be so diligent and ask for the strictness in adherence to whatever is decided here today. And that is that earlier this week, some of the members, the developer and arborist, I believe, came out to one of our neighbors' sites and discussed this tree you've already heard about, this beautiful boundary tree that the neighbor does not want to have removed. During that discussion, the neighbor said, I do not want to have it cut down, and I am paraphrasing, but I do not want to have the tree cut down, but I need to have assurance that you're going to protect the roots of this tree so that it will stay strong as it has for many, many years. The response to that, instead of we will do our best or we will ensure, was whatever happens after we finish construction, we're not accountable for. And if it comes down, you as a neighbor are liable and you may be subject to lawsuits. This was very likely not intended the way it came across, but it did sound like a scare tactic and bullying, and was not well received or something that that neighbor should have to have encountered. So that again just makes us very fearful and nervous about strict guidance on this this development and any decisions that are made.
Great. I gave you about a minute extra there. Are you pretty much done?
I would just love to wrap up by reminding you, as my colleagues have pointed out, that staff have been echoing many of our concerns about the tree preservations, and we do appreciate the discussion that's been happening back and forth, and look forward to continuing to be involved, because the plan does not seem to be final at this point. So we ask and urge that all parties, neighbors included, be involved in discussions until it is final.
Thank you very much. Are there further speakers? Look back to committee room 5 as someone approaches. Good day, sir, and welcome. I just need your name for the committee, and your 5 minutes starts now, sir.
Yes, I'm Ron McDougall. I live at 41 Camden Place. I'm addressing the need for a minor variance to the zoning B because building B is not in compliance. The zoning granted allows only 2 units to be stacked, and building 3 has 3 units stacked. As it stands under the current zoning, this would mean that 6 of the 18 units would need to be eliminated.
Sir, just
loss of these units.
Mr. McDougall, if I could just pause you there for a second. What's specific to the minor variance itself, this committee has already granted leave for the applicant to go to the Committee of the Adjustment, and that's where that will be heard. So we won't be able to influence that process at this point. So if your comments are of other nature, please focus there. But with respect to the minor variance, that won't be the purview of this committee. Just if that helps you with your time, sir.
Yeah, well, I'll try to be very brief, but does that mean that we will have an opportunity to speak?
Yes, sir. So the Committee of Adjustment has a public process, and you are able, when those go forward, there's a notification process similar to a zoning process, as well as the ability to submit comments or present to that Committee of Adjustment.
Okay, well, I'll just bring up one other point then, that we have some grave concerns about the sewage line that that is proposed that would empty into Camden Place. This is a very, very old line, and it could very easily be overwhelmed if the project finishes with considerably more occupants than they projected. We feel the sewage lines must be directed to Fanshawe Park Road. And this should be done at the time of construction, not when the existing line fails. I know that that this is still under study, but I'd just like to make the point that that we consider it a serious issue that has to be that it just an old line like that cannot withstand, and 101 occupants is, I think, somewhat light in what might be ends up in this property. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Look for any further comments. Committee room 5, we have another. Welcome, sir. Don't worry, the sanitization process does not encroach into your time.
I'm well accustomed to it. Good evening.
Welcome.
My name is Rick Giroux. I and my wife are the property owners of 1269 Hastings Drive, backing onto the subject property at 307. The original concern was my apprehension about the applicant electing to pursue removal of the hedges at the back of our property, replacing them with 6-foot-high wooden fences. We've now been informed after a meeting with the applicant a few days ago that the hedges will be retained, and after completion of the project, lightly trimmed to promote growth along the sides of the hedges. This eliminates my concern relative to hedge removal, but does not address the east-west parking lot that will be adjacent to the backyard of 1269 Hastings, or 1265 Hastings, my neighbor to the north, and about 10 feet of the northeast corner of my lot. Based on the latest site and landscape plan, the area in question will include a common area, a snow storage area, and a parking lot for approximately 17 cars and trucks. The 10-foot section at the back of my yard is a location of a pergola, which we use to relax in the evenings and entertain family and friends. Please envision facing a daily traffic of vehicles entering and exiting the parking lot, the glare of headlights, the slamming of car doors, the potential of noise emanating from the common area, and the backup signal of trucks pushing snow, notwithstanding the possible moisture problems with the snow storage area. Even with retention of hedges, this section is somewhat thin at the lower level, and it's my belief that the benefit of the hedges should be supplemented by a fence along the parking lot area, which is structured to provide both light and noise abatement characteristics. I urge you to take this into consideration, as it will and it will retain the shelter and integrity of my backyard and negate the effects of backing onto a parking lot. Thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. I look for further speakers. We'll go to committee room 1. Welcome, sir.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Peter Nowakowski.
Mr. Nowakowski, could you just speak a little bit louder? It's a little quiet. So maybe a step forward or a step or two. Wonderful, thank you.
I live at 1273 Hastings Drive, together with my wife and my son. I would like to bring another issue that I've been thinking about, and as well I addressed it at the previous meeting where we had the opportunity to speak, and that is safety of Fanshawe Park Road and safety of the future neighbors of that development. What I'm speaking about is how limited the access to that property is from Fanshawe Park Road. It's proposed that it is going to be a right-in, right-out access. Also, the proposal mentioned that there will be allowed, or currently it is not illegal to take a U-turn on Fanshawe and Hastings Drive and then make a right turn into that property. Now, I've done some studies and calculations, and it appears to me that you have about 4 seconds time to make the U-turn, after which you accelerate fast to make sure that you don't create a hazard for the oncoming traffic, and then you have to brake immediately so you can slow down and access the 307 Fanshawe Park Road. So what to me seems like necessary is another lane being built beside Fanshawe Park Road for those people that choose to turn to access the property, turn on Fanshawe, and slow down on, get off the way of the oncoming traffic, slow down and then access the property. So it seems like a third lane would be necessary to build, in my opinion. And I realize this even more now after driving from church last week on Richmond Street, where I passed by I believe it's 1235 Richmond Street. This is that tall apartment building that was built there, and somehow city staffers missed the necessity of having an area of the street widened there to allow for service trucks and taxis to be able to park in front of that building. I'm not sure if people here are aware of this, but right now there's construction going on to correct that unsafe situation there. And I believe it will be the same scenario with this property, where something will need to be done along Fanshawe Park Road to provide a safe access. And I would like just to make a point here on the record that perhaps something of that nature should be reflected on the site plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And looking into the committee rooms, I'm not seeing many people moving right now. Is there any further speakers on this matter? I'll make a second call to staff members in the committee rooms. Does it seem there is anyone else willing to speak or wishing to speak at this time?
Nobody in committee room 5 wishes to speak at this time.
Thank you very much.
Committee room 1.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Seeing no further speakers, I will take a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. Oh, suddenly everybody shows up. Thanks. With that, I'll call the vote. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5 with 1 recused.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the community members who came to speak this evening. A number of themes came through. I took some notes, and perhaps I could go to staff for some responses to those. The general themes seem to speak to trees, with a very thorough report on the status of the Norway maple and other trees within there. The questions are which trees will be retained and which is and can they be further retained than what had been indicated by the applicant. The next question was with respect to the lighting standards. So whether the lights for the parking lots and around the site will be invasive to neighboring properties. The question of snow storage and whether it meets the adequacy standards of drainage associated with the snow storage. The encroachment into the setbacks associated with some of the outbuildings like the storage shed and the amenity space. Maybe I'll pause there for a second and I'll do the rest of the list in a bit, but perhaps I'll go to Ms. Sundercock to address those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just going off of your list and mine as well. So starting off with the trees, I think it's important to notice that as mentioned in the previous meeting, actually, that site plan is very much about a balance of balancing the grading with the trees, with the building form and the parking, that everything sort of, has to mean something that really fits. And I think in this case, we're seeing sort of an influx of intensity and less of a focus being taken to the tree preservation. The trees being retained on site, not including the neighboring trees. The tree preservation plan is on page 147 of your agenda, which can hopefully provide a little bit of detail here. The trees being retained on site are trees 10, 12, 17, and 18. All of the other trees identified for preservation are neighboring trees and the one city tree, number 60. With respect to lighting, the photometric plan submitted with this application was reviewed and accepted. Just going to touch on that in my report. That was identified as well, that there's only 2 points where light will actually shine on adjacent properties. And I believe it was down to, I think, 0.2 lumens per meter. I'm just trying to find that spot in my report to reference specifically, which I think equals out to a very, very minimal light impact. The average standard sort of household light bulb is about 400 lumens. We're looking at about 3 to 4 per meter. And from the look of the photometric plan, it didn't appear that the hedges and the fencing were actually taken into account when that photometric plan was done. So I think that the impact on those properties will be minimal at best, if there is any at all, if we're accounting for the hedges and the fencing as well. Moving into the setbacks and the zoning issues. We dealt with the applicant extensively. We had a lot of back and forth on the encroachment of part of building A into the west interior side yard setback. There was a portion of the building that was sort of sticking out into that setback by about 0.3 meters. We had some discussion on that, and it sounds like the applicant is taking that off in their next submission. So the building as it stands, as it's proposed, will comply with that minimum interior side yard setback. And there was a variance or a zoning issue noted about the accessory structure at the rear of the property. I didn't have confirmation on the exact building height of that to determine the setback, because the interior side yard setback for accessory structures is determined based on the building height. So the applicant sent me an updated copy of those elevations with the building height noted, and I was able to confirm that the structure as proposed does meet the minimum interior side yard setbacks for that.
Great. I think that was my first batch of questions that came up. The second set with respect to the fencing around the perimeter, the snow storage, the windows on the western elevation of Building A, and the question of root protection for the neighborhood character tree, or the neighboring character tree.
Absolutely. So talking about the fence, there is a discrepancy between the landscape plans and the site plans that were submitted. The landscape plan is more accurate. It shows the existing hedges to be retained, and then it shows fencing in between them, where there are gaps between the existing hedges. That's what the development is proposed. The site plan just shows a board-on-board fence all actually being proposed. So that will have to be updated with the next submission, but those hedges are being retained with fencing in between the gaps between the hedges.
Sorry, just to pause you there for a second, your audio cut out for a second while you were explaining the component other than the filling in the gaps in the hedge. So the fence will not be a contiguous fence around the perimeter. It will address the areas of gap of privacy between the hedges. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
So moving into the issue of the windows on the interior sides of Building A, I think specifically, it's typical in the difference between zoning and site plan. A lot of times that the drawings at zoning aren't necessarily as detailed, as the applicant hasn't gone to a great deal of detail to really design the buildings structurally before they get to site plan. So things do tend to change, and I think that changes in windows are something we do typically see. I think it's important to note that the shift from full length to transom windows is something that we would be supportive of, and it's something that was included as a recommendation to the applicant as well with our latest submission comments to consider. Moving into the snow storage and the snow removal, I'm going to let Heather answer that question.
Thank you for that, Meg. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to emphasize that this site has been reviewed comprehensively from a servicing perspective. Technical details, Ismail can answer those, but we just wanted to emphasize that the site has been designed to control at a storm level of 250 storm levels. And typically these sites have a control of 100-year storm events. So this has been taken into account. There's sufficient buffer areas that allow for the swale that, as the consulting engineer had indicated, as well as along the dispersed along the site. Recognizing that there are some weather events that we do have in London, but that's anywhere with throughout the city. Again, Stormwater Management Group have signed off in terms of the servicing design. This site can contain any of the snow storage as well as water, and emphasis on the dispersion of any existing sheet flows that exist today. We're actually cutting that in half. Part of the flow is moving towards Fanshawe, and then what people do see today, they may still continue to see some ponding, but most of that is actually going to be directed to what you could call like a bath. There's a bath that's, as the consulting engineer had indicated, there's a 5% grade towards the parking area. And having said that, that's an area that gets contained, and then that disperses to, we'll say, another bathtub. So, and then from there, there's an outlet. That's the best plain language I can use to explain how it works. But I just want to emphasize that it's the storm water that's going to be contained on site is being held and then released slowly. And so the issue with snow storage, again, in terms of the dispersion of that, as well as the site design in terms of a servicing can handle it, it actually is over-designed to accommodate for that. And in terms of any purview for the committee, should you decide to move into that direction of the removal of the snow, we'll leave that to you, and then we will have to deal with those clauses in the development agreement at that time. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. I think the remaining questions I have here, there was a question regarding the capacity of the sewer line heading out towards Camden. If it had the capacity to be able to take the additional inputs of the new development. And the next concerns were very much specific to the final concerns there were specific to the traffic safety and the traffic management plan associated with the development.
Yes, yes, through you, Chair. This is Ismail Abu Shahada, Manager of Development Engineering.
Welcome, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I guess I will add a third question. There was a concern about the sewer status as well. So sewer status and capacity. But with regard to sewer status, we require or we ask, among our requirement is the applicant to have a video surveillance and provide full detail to us. It will be reviewed by our storm sewer engineering, and it will be evaluated based on whatever the status. I know it's an older one, but it's now working. With regard to capacity, the capacity of this sewer is over 32 cubic meters, while the sewer directed or the flow directed to the south and controlled by an orifice is very way less. It's 13 something cubic meters, so it will be less than a third of the capacity. So there is no concern about capacity here. what I can assure everybody, I think, based on the studies we are reviewing and whatever we have in our hands, that the flow situation will be much better after the development than before the development, because of at least too many measures we enforce on the developer, and thanks, it was coordinated and cooperated. We take part of the new development, while now everything is go to the south, we take part of it now to the north. Plus, we are doing an orifice in the back, so the snow and whatever snow melting or flow, it will go just controlled to the Cadman Road. There is no issue here with regarding to the capacity, and I don't think there's any problem. This is under control still by us and by our stormwater management. We ask for a video review, and if there is any issue with the status, they have to replace it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Abusheda.
Last question with regarding to traffic. The axis, as you can see now, it's right in, right out. And right in, we have always a kind of a merge lane to get into the right, and the same way when you go out. So that's, I think it's detail, but it will come as part of the access to the property. Don't see any really, actually the measure of right in, right out as an access is meant for the safety. So I guess it will make it much more safer. We don't allow any kind of full access.
Thank you, Mr. Abusheda.
Excuse me?
Yes.
This is Lisa McNiven, landscape architect in Development Services. Through the chair, I'd like to address the group, please.
Please go ahead.
I've reviewed the tree protection plan submitted, and I just wanted to identify some issues to the group that I have some concerns about. The tree report assessed 61 trees. 12 of them are off-site on neighbors' properties. One of those off-site trees is a city tree, and there are some boundary trees. They've identified one on the tree report. I question 4 others. I just need to have verification on a survey. And of the council resolution to identify perimeter trees within the boundary, I applied a 5-meter rule from the property line. And within that area, I found 16 perimeter trees, and 4 of which are now being proposed to be saved. I have to stress that the off-site trees are protected by 2 city bylaws. The tree protection bylaw protects all trees off-site. And there's the boulevard tree protection bylaw, which protects the street tree. If the developers want to remove any of the off-site trees, they need to get permits from the transportation department and the urban forestry groups. When I had discussed with some of them already about some of the issues, they were not in favor of removing some of the off-site trees, or they would need to review the permit, but they're not definitely in support of doing that. My other issue is that with the case of the on-site trees and the resolution to exclude invasive trees or hazard trees, there are a number of mulberries along the edge. Those are the ones that I'm questioning. There's a silver maple, Norway maple, and there is a line in the design specifications manual that these trees that are deemed generally undesirable or not permitted, that there can be special considerations if the species are involved in a special circumstance, and that may be applicable in this situation. As far as the hazard trees go, I guess I have two questions. One is, are the trees currently a hazard? Were they a hazard before the removal of the building? There could be damage done to them from the heavy equipment on the site. Are they a hazard as they exist now, or are they deemed a hazard because of the proposed development they're putting in proximity to them? I do require that a certified risk assessor be to assess the trees that are identified for removal because they're risks. There is an International Society of Arborists that has a certification process program, and there's a process to review those trees. And I would like those trees reviewed by a certified inspector.
Thank you, Ms. McNiven. Any further responses from staff with respect to the questions that were posed? I see none at this point. I will turn to the committee. I see Councillor Hopkins would like to speak or ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Chair, for allowing me. Yeah, I'm just thinking too, it's been a long time here. Everything is a little strange and I'm a little lost, so I do apologize, but thank you for allowing me to speak to this. I have been the councillor that has been facilitating the community with information to staff, and I want to just take this opportunity to thank the community for being here tonight, and I really do appreciate the comments, and I want to thank staff too for the work that they have been doing. In particular, Meg Sundercock, she I think has been listening and hearing the information and working with the applicant. I also want to thank the applicant too as well. And I want to thank the committee here, because I know this has been a long application, and for your due diligence in seeing this application go through. I want to thank the applicant in terms of, I think it's important that we understand the applicant is going to be retaining the hedges. It's something that is important. I've heard from the community that they be maintained, and has addressed the concerns that the community has through this site plan process when it comes to lighting and fencing. And also, I don't know if you recall, when we were dealing with the zoning, the special requirements for parking too that we had added, and the applicant has listened to us. I also want to make a comment about the applicant sort of intending here to remove the snow removal. I think that's really important to know that will be happening. And I also want to thank the applicant for working with this community. We've had many meetings throughout this course of this application, and also to the applicant's consultant as well, trying to work with the community, coming up with the best plan possible for this community. But I do want to make a comment about this recommendation before us. There are still outstanding concerns that remain. And if you look at 4.8, I'm not going to go through them all. That is something that, still has to be dealt with. I also want to bring to your attention 4.62, the stormwater management comments as well. Again, getting back to the intent that the applicant has expressed, the removal of the snow storage. But I know from day one, when I started to learn about this application and about the community, the concerns around water and the need to maintain and to deal with the stormwater management. They are meeting the requirements. I understand that. There are still a few minor clarifications, but I think it's really important that that the snow be dealt with. And we heard from Heather, from staff, Heather McNeely, about the snow removal, and that there is an opportunity within the development agreement to encourage that snow removal. I think that is important. I'll be requesting that a special provision be put in that agreement, not so much for now, but what happens down the road in the future with ownership changes and that. It, again, the concerns with that water, and their swales, I know, are all in there, and we're meeting the 200-year mark, but it's something that I think is important and that can be done. And of course, the retention of trees and the concerns that remain around the border. And I would definitely encourage the applicant to fulfill the information needed in that tree preservation report as well, that is not there. So I just want to say that this is the last time that the community is going to be able to make a comments to the site plan process here. And given the number of concerns that remain, especially around the trees, it is a council resolution that we made. I want to thank staff for taking that seriously. So I'll sort of leave it with that. I am hoping to add a C that it be further noted that the development as proposed conforms to the requirements of the council's resolution. We specifically the requirement for the protection and preservation of trees. I did hear from staff that there needs to be some risk assessment management added to that. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues about those thoughts as we move through this site plan process. And also a C that we add to the development agreement, a special provision to deal with the removal of snow on site. It's important, especially through that spring period, that we have less water. So with that, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Other members of the committee wishing to speak? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to just ask, I'm not sure if it's a question for planning staff or the applicant, but in terms of further opportunities for tree preservation, I don't have the advantage of being able to see what the assessment of each of these trees is, but I'm going to just talk about them in groups. So in the southeast corner where the storage shed is proposed, there's a parking spots and then a storage shed. It looks like tree 25, 26, 27, and 29 are all marked for removal. What kind of changes to the site plan would be necessary to allow some additional of those trees to be retained? And what's the sort of health status of those trees? Like, if they were not disturbed by the site plan, would they be fine to be retained? So 25, 26, 27, 29.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer. I would perhaps go to staff first, but I think there's a representative from the applicant who might be able to identify that as well.
I can address the question, Lisa McNiven, through the chair. The 4 trees in that lower area is an ash tree, which is probably going to be in its final stages because of the ash borer. That's tree number 25. 26 is a cherry tree. 29 is a Norway maple. And then one of the trees I questioned down there is I think it's a boundary tree, but the plan shows it as a within boundary tree, is a silver maple. So the canopy and the root spread of those, the silver maple would be my concern, rather than just because it's, anyway, the silver maple or the Norway maple would be the concerns if we wanted to retain a tree with canopy. Right now, the parking lot impacts not just the shed, but the parking lot up about 1, 2, 3, 4 stalls will impact that Norway maple. So the parking lot itself is hurting that tree. The silver maple in the corner, minimal damage with the shed if they were putting in a concrete slab. But I think that tree is denoted to be removed.
Thank you, Ms.
Just
McNiven.
because it's a hazard.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I just wanted to verify the silver maple is a 27 or 28?
27.
Okay.
28 is an off-site pear tree.
Yeah. And the trees that are along the sort of easterly boundary in the space between what is proposed to be the parking spaces and the property line, there's a large number of smaller trees, sort of 15, 16, 13, and then out at the top end, I think it's 9. What is the health of those trees, especially the ones that are pretty close to the fence line and relatively small?
Sorry.
Are we frozen, Chair?
I was just taking a look. I saw a little note that said Ms. McNiven was talking, but Ms. McNiven, are you there?
I am here. I don't know. Sorry.
Oh.
We don't, the tree report will give us a very brief description of those trees. We don't have a very detailed, report as to what is their probability of failure with construction or those kind of things. They are making recommendations to do kind of softer excavation around those roots, but there's probably probably going to be removal of some roots, which is going to affect their structural stability and their viability.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. That's helpful for understanding what's going on in the tree preservation plan. I don't know if there's anything the applicant's consultant wants to add about those trees specifically on the eastern boundary, sort of in around tree 14.
Sir, you look like you're ready to answer.
Thank you. Trying to be efficient in doing this. Agreed that the 29 is distinctly a hazard tree. The trees along the east boundary generally are in fairly good shape, with the exception of tree number 14 that I referred to earlier. We would, because it's a boundary tree, our position is it is a hazard and should be removed because the owner wants to keep it. The client does not want to litigate that, though he could. I'm going to make several general comments here, if I may. One is, in terms of my qualifications, I've been qualified for decades as an expert witness in hazard tree assessment in both the provincial and federal courts. In fact, the City of London has used me before. The ISA registration thing that Ms. McNiven refers to came after, well after that qualification, so I did not have to seek it. As I have mentioned, though, we do have all of our work peer-reviewed, as most competent professionals do. So an ISA certified arborist will be looking at our risk assessment. In fact, I did mention in my presentation that we already have consulted with one with respect to some of the trees. And one particular tree, it's 50-50 split. So when we disagree, we bring in a third party arborist to look at that as well. So the other thing I'm going to be quite frank on, the numbers are still incorrect that the city staff are citing. I've I've mentioned that several times in my presentation. That will be evident in our next report because several changes have been made to the site plan since we first did the assessment. And we have asked several times, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit churlish here, to meet with city staff digitally about these, and we're told that they would not. So we've been seeking to move forward with, so staff have a factual basis, and they have not wanted to hear about it yet. 3 times tonight, I've heard the numbers being incorrectly quoted, and professionally, we have to defend ourselves. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Not sure if I answered all of your questions, sir.
Deputy Mayor, anything further?
No, you did not. I'm asking about the small trees. You mentioned that they're in good health, so I take it from that it's the site plan itself that is requiring the removal, and it's not something else about the trees. So I wasn't asking 14. I was asking about the ones sort of in and around there. But I think
have my colleague Ms. Buck address that.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Buck. I've been working on this project, and just to address particular trees along that eastern boundary, tree 9 is a Norway maple. It's actually growing, it's a volunteer, so it's grown from a leaf, a key, and it's growing up into the canopy under tree 10, which is a white pine. So it's just something that has grown. It was not planted. It's not in great shape. It's kind of crooked, and we don't want it growing into the white pine canopy and impacting that. So that's why it's slated for removal. As I mentioned, tree 10 is white pine. It's in fairly good shape, and we have amended, just to let Lisa know, we have amended our report, and we're working towards our next submission. Tree 11 is bur oak, and as you can see, it is in the parking area, so we have it slated for removal. Tree 12 is another white pine. It's a bit smaller because it's grown in between other trees. It's narrower. It just doesn't have the access to sunlight to grow larger, so that's why it's shown as a smaller tree. Tree 13 is Norway maple, and again, that one appears to be a volunteer, and there was another stump there originally that has since decayed, so I would suspect it's a volunteer from the way it's growing, so it was not planted there. Tree 14 we've discussed as being a hazard tree. That's the boundary tree. Tree 15 is a mulberry. Again, it's a volunteer. It was not planted. It's growing up into the canopy of the silver maple that is present. Tree 16 is a cedar, an eastern white cedar. It's in decent shape, but it would be fairly difficult to save that. Tree 17 and 18, we have slated, we've said that we would like to save those. Tree 21, we're working towards a solution to save that bur oak as well. It would require some pruning up on the east side to remove the lower branches. It's a massive, beautiful tree that we would like to save, and we're addressing how to have the drainage swale to the east of that right now, just to answer that question. And then, sorry, skip 21. 20 actually has been removed. There was a barn on that site originally. Tree 20 was an ash that had grown up the side of it, but it has been removed in the process of removing the barn and the single dwelling that was there. And then along that southeastern boundary is cedar hedge, which will be lightly pruned and taken care of. We're hoping to maintain it and get it back into shape once a lot of the larger trees are out of the way. We have the opportunity for the sunlight to help the growth of the cedars so that they provide more privacy. with the large trees in the way, it's impossible for us to have them thicken up so that they do provide the privacy that the neighborhood is looking for.
Thank you, Ms. Buck.
Have I addressed everything?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Deputy Mayor, you still have the floor if you wish.
Thank you. So just in terms of comments, I mean, the site plan's in front of us for comments, and I agree with the assessment that, you know, that direction that we put in the zoning to try and preserve as many of the boundary trees as possible, we haven't quite reached that. And I think I can see how difficult it is to try and wedge the proposal in and retain the trees that are there. You know, we have, I'm not a landscape architect, but I can see some of the problems where you've got smaller trees underneath larger trees, and they're running into each other and becoming a bit of an issue when you're thinking about the longer term trajectory. And I think we need to be thinking about, you know, what is it going to look like right away, but also what is it going to look like 5 and 10 years down the road as everything grows in. And so the reason I'm asking about the easterly boundary and the southeast corner is it seems to me, as a layperson just looking at it, that if you were to make changes to the site plan, you know, absent moving the buildings around, you know, that's where you have opportunities to make adjustments, either by pulling the parking area in or pulling it further to the west or something like that. So I wanted to ask about them to see, you know, what kind of opportunities there were. If they were all ash trees, for example, and vulnerable to ash borer, I don't know how much effort should be put into trying to retain them. You'd probably be looking at more of a replanting kind of situation. So that's why I asked those questions. I appreciated the detailed answers. I know that everybody's trying to get the best possible outcome in terms of how many trees can be retained and how much privacy can be afforded by the vegetation buffer that's going to be there now and also in the future as things grow in. And I think the efforts to retain the hedging has been excellent. I think the some of the comments of the experts, I can appreciate that people get annoyed when we're having these kind of discussions, but I don't think that you know which numbers are correct and those kind of comments are particularly helpful. We're trying to focus in on the issues and the problems. How can we address them? I'm more interested in those kind of discussions. So I did want to say that. I do see that there's going to be limited opportunities in the southwest corner, you know, to retain some of those trees, but I think that the retention of the hedges along there will be good. My general comments are, you know, this needs some more work, and especially in terms of the trees. And right now we're looking at the tree preservation plan, and I think, you know, if there can be some more trees retained there, I think that would be helpful. But I also think we need to look at the overall landscape plan where we're looking at what's it going to look like with some additional plantings as well, because that might address some of these concerns. That's it from me.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ms. McNeely, you've had your hand up. Sorry, I didn't go to you earlier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to emphasize just a couple of matters, and I appreciate the comment that it's not about the number of trees and all the rest of it. I just want to emphasize in terms of page 147 of the digital agenda, the on-site trees that staff have identified as worthy of retention. 21 that Ms. Buck had mentioned is a large tree and worthy of retention, and the parking area may have some impacts on that. 31 at the south is worthy of retention, and number 36 at the southwest corner also is worthy of retention, and that will have impact with the most southerly portion of that building B. So that's what we wanted to bring to your attention following the council resolution. And there are other boundary trees and other offsite trees, and that's why we've created that diagram for you on page 147. And to Ms. McNiven's point, in terms of the report, it just wasn't really clear enough from a staff perspective to review it fully. And we wanted to make sure that, given the council direction, and we do take these things seriously, and I appreciate Councillor Hopkins' recognition of that, is that we wanted to make sure what are the hazards, and we want to make sure that is it based on the life cycle? Are they going to fall down anyway? We don't know that for some of those boundary trees or the trees that we're talking about in the shed area. The hazards as a result of the development. What are the impacts on the root zone? And that's where we've identified 36 and 21, for example. Those will have impacts with construction, as well as some of those other ones, 6 and 14, for example, with the impact of the bringing in the access driveway. So those are the ones that we just wanted to focus on. I know I personally was in a digital meeting on June 12th that Ms. Buck had arranged. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Ms. Sundercock can comment on the other correspondence, internal meetings that we've had through digital means with the consultants as well. But so I can pass that over to her. But I just wanted to make those comments just to clarify as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. McNeely. I'll go back to the committee at this point. Is there any other members of the committee wishing to speak? Seeing none at this point. Then we have some possible amendments or additions to the motion from Councillor Hopkins, specifically with respect to conforming to the requirements of the council resolution and a special provision for snow removal. Is someone looking to make the motion?
Yes, I would be pleased to do that and hear comments, or I guess I need a seconder, first of all. And the reason why I am doing this, bringing it as an added to C and D, is that this is the last time the community will have an opportunity to speak to it. And these two items are I think integral to this application moving forward. Maybe not so much integral, but we do have a council resolution when it comes to the trees. I don't want that to be lost. So just as a C, that as we go through the site plan process, that we further look at the requirements of this council resolution. I think it is really important. Staff did point out the outstanding site plan comments, but in particular the 6 trees there that we have been talking about and how we move forward with the site plan. I know it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and it still looks like there's more work to be had, but I do not want that resolution to be sort of put aside, even though it's there. It just, for me, it just underlines the requirement. And also getting back to the C part where the development agreement, we could put in that special provision. We know the intent is to remove the snow to lessen the water, but I do think it is very important that as the development proceeds and with changes in ownerships, or that is not lost, that the snow removal would be in place. So I'm hoping I could get a seconder, and I'll go from there.
I'll look for a seconder. Mayor Holder. Okay. Any discussion? I think perhaps the clause B, council advise the approval of authority of any issues they may have with respect to the site plan application. Your C and D kind of qualify as those items in there. So I'm not sure the best way to dispense with that, if that's it. But Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just wanted to check to see whether specifically identifying 21, 31, 36 would be helpful in terms of giving feedback to the site plan approval authority, because I do think there's opportunities to retain those trees. They're certainly significant, and I'd like to keep as many of them as possible through the rest of the site plan process. So I know the previous resolution covers all the boundary trees, things along the perimeter, but I wonder if we should be a bit more specific about 21, 31, and 36.
I'll look to Ms. McNeely if that's helpful.
Yes, that would be. Thank you.
Very good. Anything further, Deputy Mayor?
Nope.
Councillor Hopkins.
I wonder if the deputy mayor would add to that list the 614 as well, the 6 trees and number 60. I just, I think it's important. It could be clear. It's already stated that 21, 31, and 36 are something that should be retained, but just wondering if he would be open to adding the 6 trees.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, could I ask you to take the chair for a second?
I have the chair. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mrs. Acting Presiding Officer. Just with respect to Councillor Hopkins' recommendation for the special provision for snow removal, I do have just a concern with that one. We've heard from staff and the engineers that identify that the snow solution, snow storage solution identified by the applicant meets and exceeds the requirements here. I have a challenge in challenging. I guess there's an apprehension that the engineering won't be sufficient, but there's a requirement that the engineering is sufficient. Staff have identified that it's not only sufficient, but it significantly exceeds the requirements of that 100-year to a 250-year piece. So I'm not supportive of the inclusion of that provision. I think it's a little extra onus on the applicant. I think there's a lot of other things that need to be sorted out on this plan, but I think the resolution to snow has probably been sufficiently addressed through this application. The other items that staff have identified that need to continue to be resolved prior to final approval of the site plan, I think those are all fair, and the other ones that you've raised as well, along with Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you for those comments, and I will hand the chair back to you.
Thank you. With that, perhaps I would just separate out that clause if I could, and then the rest of them we'll bring forward for a motion, unless anyone else wishes to speak at this time. Seeing none. Madam Clerk, if you might just identify what the motion that we have brought forward here is. I think it's the recommendation there, which is that Planning and Environment Committee report to the Approval Authority. Council advise the Approval Authority of the issues and the issues that are identified as Councillor Hopkins and Deputy Mayor Helmer have listed.
You are correct, and it's to retain trees 6, 14, 21, 31, 36, and 60 specifically. Also, it being noted that the development as proposed conforms to the requirements of the Council resolution dated October 2nd, 2019, specifically the requirement for the protection and preservation of the trees. And
we'll call this the final clause in there, the special provision for snow removal, as a separate item if we could. Okay. All right. So I think procedurally we know where we're heading from here. I'll look for any final comments before I call the vote. So it's been moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Holder, and I'll call the vote. So I'll start with Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Caught you off guard. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
And I vote yes. On the second item, with the special provision for snow removal, I'll call the question on that. So I'll start with Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Nope.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
No.
And I vote no. And I think I may not have given the clerk the opportunity to call out the result of the first vote, and so perhaps we'll call both of those soon.
The vote for the first motion carries 5 with 1 recused, and I just need a moment for the second vote.
Thank you.
Apologies, I've missed the mayor's vote. If he doesn't mind voting again, apologies.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Again, apologies for missing that. The motion fails 2-3 with 1 recused.
Thank you. And so, look to the committee to see if there's any other items, deferred matters or additional business. Seeing none, I think we've dispensed with the items on the agenda. I thank you all for your time this evening. I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Holder. Oh, there we go. Okay. And I will take a show of hands. All in favor? And that motion.
In favor.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good night.